FPS Win. Written by
嘟嘟雪球
Chapter 373. After talking with Xiaoyu, all the confusion in Chen Chen's heart was answered. At this time, he could be said to have a clear mind and no more worries, because he knew that most of the underwater things had already been solved by someone else. Although his Dongfeng Corps did pay a heavy price, there is no doubt that after this incident, the rewards he will receive will also be huge. But to be honest, from this perspective, the Dongfeng Corps in Indonesia is not like a mercenary group, but more like a combat investigation group. Use battles again and again to come into contact with different forces, to look for hidden clues, to uncover one mystery after another, and ultimately to help certain people reach the other side of the truth. And now, everything has reached the brink of settling. The Dongfeng Corps had to change its job from investigator to executioner, and do some dirty work for its old customers. After leaving the office, Chen Chen went straight to Wang Qi, and then under his guidance, he found Bashir who was imprisoned in the kennel. Of course, Wang Qi really had no intention of insulting Bashir. The only reason he chose this location was safety. Well, having a dog watching is much safer than having a person watching alone. After seeing Bashir, Chen Chen gave a gesture to Li Bang who was guarding him. The latter did not misjudge, but untied Bashir and brought him to Chen Chen. Let's talk in my office. Chen Chen spoke briefly, and then everyone returned to the office again. After driving everyone out, Chen Chen finally spoke and said to Bashir, "To be honest, I didn't expect you to be such an important person. However, the significant impact of the Bali incident is still rooted in this land today, and we really shouldn't underestimate you. You disguised yourself so well that we even thought you were really a JD leader. But now it seems that things are more complicated than most people think. No wonder you can live for so many years without dying." Ahem. Chen Chen coughed and didn't continue. He just subconsciously recalled his past life's memories and almost let the cat out of the bag. Of course, this was not because he was not cautious enough, but because he knew that the person in front of him was about to die, so he was indeed a little relaxed. After hearing his words, Bashir on the opposite side also sighed. "So you already know the whole story?" "That's right." Chen Chen nodded slightly. "Then your identity is not as simple as I thought. Perhaps it is the same for everyone. Our beliefs are different, our goals are different, but in a sense, our goals are the same. Don't forget to flatter yourself. You are a murderer, and you are not worthy of touching me." A mocking smile appeared on Chen Chen's face. Bashir was stunned for a moment and asked, "You think you are not?" "Of course I'm not. I specialize in killing murderers. Does that mean there is no need for me to live anymore?" "That's right. They've already completed the deal. You're useless." Hearing this, a hint of despair flashed in Bashir's eyes. "What a shame. I thought I was still okay. Never mind. Then you actually didn't need to waste so much time with me. You could have sent me away just now in your kennel. After all, you don't need to get any more information from me. I have no grudge against you, so there is no question of revenge. I hope you can give me a dignified death. Is this request not too much?" Bashir spoke very frankly. If Chen Chen was really just a mercenary who grew up in Pubei, he might have been convinced by him. But the problem is he isn't. And precisely because he is not, he finds Bashir's words even more ridiculous. Advertisement, what does it mean to have no hatred or resentment? If Bashir is really a religious fanatic, if he really wants to build a heaven on earth in Indonesia like those people, then it really has nothing to do with Chen Chen. But he is not. Judging from the current situation, Bashir is a key figure in Suharto's camp. He has planned more than one major events, and he has succeeded every time before this time. The Suharto camp itself had a blood feud. In this case, it is really ridiculous to describe the relationship between the two parties as no hatred or resentment. Thinking of this, Chen Chen shook his head and said, "The reason why I didn't get rid of you immediately has nothing to do with other people. It's just me who needs to confirm some things. Of course, it's something about you." Bashir on the other side nodded slightly, then replied, "You can ask. I've been abandoned by everyone and have nothing to hide." He probably thought that Chen Chen was going to ask questions about this incident and the so-called Sword of God, so he behaved extremely calmly, even with a kind of carefree attitude. But what Chen Chen said next made him freeze in place. "When did you join Suharto's camp?" Bashir frowned subconsciously, as if lost in memory. After a long while, he finally answered, 1970. "At that time, I was still very young. Yeah, you were so young back then." Chen Chen followed up on his words with a somewhat cold tone. Bashir seemed to suddenly realize something, and his eyes instantly turned into fear. He suddenly stood up from his chair and wanted to argue, but Chen Chen did not give him the chance. He knew that threatening with a gun was meaningless, so he took a step forward and kicked Bashir directly to the ground. The severe pain and feeling of suffocation made this elderly, old man speechless. His chest kept heaving, and his hands were grabbing in the air, as if trying to grasp some illusory hope. Chen Chen watched his movements indifferently, and when his pain gradually eased, he kicked him in the waist at just the right moment. Then Chen Chen said, "I'm still not good at this kind of thing. To be honest, I don't need to punish you for your crimes by torturing and killing, because no matter how cruel the method is, it can't offset what you have done. You deserve a trial, but the truth is, no one wants to judge you. Besides, you are not a pure believer, and you will not really feel pain because of certain doctrines. It's just not fair. So I have an idea." "Sure, Dakai." Chen Chen shouted loudly, and Sure Dakai, who was waiting outside the door, immediately pushed the door open and walked in. He glanced at Bashir on the ground and asked, "How should we deal with this?" Chen Chen was silent for 2 seconds, then said, "Go find a box to put it in, weld it shut, and throw it into the sea. Throw it alive." The VBSS rebellion was quelled much faster than Chen Chen had expected, probably because the so-called deal had been reached, or because the president staged a modern version of Chow Chow burning the letter. In short, except for some officers and soldiers in the commando camp who were involved in bloodshed, the rebels gathered near La Boda were quickly disbanded. The real, modern army, under the president's command, took over La Boda and planned to start a large-scale clearing operation. All the JD elements entrenched in Sulawesi have become frightened birds. Some of them tried to fight to the death, while the vast majority of them have completely fallen silent. However, all this has nothing to do with Chen Chen. After completing the final handover with the military and confirming Bashir's death, he directly broke off contact with the military. Of course, except for Buck. His current situation is extremely special. No one will really send him to a military court for murder, but what he has done is really unacceptable to the existing order in Indonesia. Therefore, he could not return to Task Force 88, nor could he continue to have contact with the police. Before the incident was finally determined, he became an unwanted free man. So, with nothing else to do, he went directly to Chen Chen, wanting to seek some advice from Chen Chen. Sitting in the office of the Dongfeng Corps, Buck carefully took off the hat Ping Chuan gave him to protect the gauze on his head, and said in a polite but equal tone, "So the situation is just as I told you. After this incident, my situation may become quite embarrassing. I may not have anything to do for a long time to come. Can you imagine? No one even wants to investigate me now. I took the initiative to seek contact with the military and police, but they just told me to rest. This situation makes me feel very uneasy, so I want to ask you. You are probably the only person I can contact who knows the whole story, and maybe you can give me some advice. Of course, if my request seems presumptuous to you, then I'm sorry to bother you." Hearing his words, Chen Chen nodded slightly, but did not answer immediately. In fact, he had already had some communication with Buck before and learned from him about his previous secret intersection with the Dongfeng Corps. Objectively speaking, Buck let the Dongfeng Corps go twice, and the last time, even though they had already pulled out their stingers, he was able to hold back on taking action. In a sense, this person's position is indeed very firm. Of course, he does not represent the position of the 88th Task Force, the military, or a certain interest group, but represents the position of the real Indonesian people. The choices he made were in the best interest of this country, or at least, from his perspective, it is in the country's interest. Therefore, in Chen Chen's opinion, this is indeed a relatively pure person, especially in an environment like Indonesia. Although he is stained with a lot of mud on the surface, his core is still quite pure. I can't say that you can cooperate with such people, but there is really no harm in getting in touch with them, as long as your authority permits and it does not affect the overall situation. What's wrong with giving him some useful suggestions? Thinking of this, Chen Chen said, "The situation in Indonesia is much more complicated than you think. I can give you two basic pieces of information. First, no one will hold you responsible for Wiranto's death. He probably committed suicide by shooting himself. Second, you will not be able to continue working in the military and police system. You must show enough sincerity to convince your superiors. Otherwise, you may face the situation of controlled use." Controlled use? Buck asked doubtfully. Obviously, he could not understand the true meaning of this literal translation from the north. From this perspective, he was indeed inferior to the jackal in linguistics. If it were jackal, he would probably know what this pun meant as soon as he heard it. Chen Chen coughed and said, "That's right. On the surface, it's about use, but in reality, it's about control. They will monitor you as a sensitive target, assign you a leisurely job, and use a sum of money to buy you stability for the rest of your life." That's not bad. Buck smiled and nodded, and continued, "This result is at least better than I expected. I thought I might be killed after it was over. Like dying from the sequelae of a concussion or something. Impossible." Chen Chen shook his head and replied, "If that's the case, I should be the one doing it." "Understood. Thank you anyway." Buck's expression was sincere, but after a brief silence, he suddenly spoke again. "But there is still some distance to the time when you said things are completely over. What should I do in the meantime?" "There's nothing to do." "Wait." Chen Chen spread his hands and answered, "All right." Buck nodded helplessly, and looking at his expression, Chen Chen couldn't help but feel a little emotional. In fact, he is destined to be buried. No matter how great his ideals and ambitions are, after this incident, he will inevitably become a victim of some power game. But maybe I can give him a chance? To be honest, Buck's dilemma cannot be solved from the inside. However, external forces like ourselves, especially those that have made great contributions in this turmoil, can indeed do something. After all, he is just a minor character. The purpose of the official control over him is simply to ensure that some truths that should be buried are not uncovered. That being the case, thinking of this, Chen Chen said, "There is another option. Join the Dongfeng Corps?" Buck immediately responded, then shook his head and replied, "I'm sorry, I have to refuse your kindness. My family is here. This is my country, my land. I can't be a mercenary and wander around." "No." Chen Chen interrupted Buck and continued, "You don't need to join the Dongfeng Corps, you just need to cooperate with us. We need someone who can make connections in Indonesia. Do you understand what I mean? Relying on the power of the Dongfeng Corps, you can quickly increase your influence. As long as your influence breaks through a certain limit, you can break the fate of being controlled. This is a win-win choice. Do you understand?" Buck nodded suddenly and replied, "You want me to be the broker for the Dongfeng Corps?" "That's right. Are you willing to give me this chance?" "Advertisement. You need to give me a letter of surrender." Chen Chen spoke decisively and put forward his own conditions. "Our mission is not over yet. Next, we need to control a cargo ship sailing on the sea. There are civilians, militants, and perhaps other forces on board this cargo ship that we are not aware of. We need to control all members on board as much as possible. We only have one chance to attack, so we must ensure an absolute success rate. I heard that you served in Marash before joining Task Force 88. You should be very professional in this area. Help us complete this mission, and I'll give you a chance." Buck nodded slightly and replied, "I did retire from Marash. So you're going to do a .VBSS mission?" "That's right. You need me to train your team?" "No, we don't need training. We need actual combat exercises." "Understood." Hearing this, Buck nodded solemnly. "I'll join, but I won't do anything for you that would harm the interests of this country." "Certainly." A smile appeared on Chen Chen's face. "We are not the United States. We don't do this kind of thing. Believe me, after a while, you will truly understand what win-win means." Cooperation with Buck was not originally in Chen Chen's plan, but after communication, he did find that this was the most suitable foreign aid he could find at the moment. The reason was simple. He was about to lead a team to carry out an anti-hijacking mission against a cargo ship at sea. But the members of the Dongfeng Corps were actually not familiar with this type of mission, including Chen Chen himself, who did not have much practical experience. How could they have played this in their previous life? When the force was weak in the early stage, the ships basically did not check and mainly tracked, monitored, and attacked ground hideouts. In the later stages, with sufficient strength, ship inspections became less complicated. A 22mm anti-aircraft gun is pointed at your head. Do you dare to tell me that you won't dock your ship? Then I really dare to fire a cannon at you. After the ship stops, the ships controlling the dock will not carry out the search immediately. In many cases, they will wait for a few days and then search the ship after the roundup operation on the ground is completed. Even if there were hidden militants on the ship, they would surrender within a few days. So, in this regard, Chen Chen was really not that professional. His original plan was to ask Xiaoyu for help and transfer a few instructors from the police or the Marash force to conduct emergency training. But now, if Buck was originally a retired Malash player, wouldn't it be easier to find him? So, the matter was finalized, and just 2 hours later, all 12 members of the Dongfeng Corps, except the wounded, gathered together and started their first round of theoretical classes. In fact, VBSS tactics and CQB tactics are very similar to some extent. Both tactics involve fighting in narrow terrain, and both aim to control or clean up all enemies in the target area in the shortest possible time in order to achieve the goal of rescuing hostages and clearing the area. However, unlike urban tactics such as CQB, all processes of VBSS tactics are extremely dangerous. The so-called VBSS refers to the 4 parts of approach: boarding, search, and seizure. Among them, the approach link alone has 3 different routes: air, sea, and underwater. Each route has a variety of different modes of action. For example, a helicopter approaches at low altitude and quickly rappels down to board the ship. A small boat follows and approaches, and a gangway or soft ladder is used to climb aboard. Or an underwater diving approach uses a rope to board the ship. Each type of action requires a very high level of professionalism from the team, which is determined by the particularity of the offshore platform. If special operations forces without professional training act arbitrarily, the mission will usually end in tragedy. The most typical case is the Mayaguez freighter hijacking in 1975. At that time, a certain Cambodian force hijacked the Mayaguez freighter and detained 39 crew members as hostages. After preliminary reconnaissance, the U.S. Marine Corps decided to launch the operation themselves. However, despite their comprehensive advantages in equipment and intelligence and the mobilization of 200 Marines, they still paid a heavy price of 41 lives, and the operation ultimately ended in failure. It was precisely because of the tragic lesson of this incident that after 1978, the U.S. Special Forces began to carry out special training in anti-hijacking and anti-maritime hijacking and gradually developed it into a mature and systematic tactics. Since then, this set of tactics has been rapidly promoted, and special forces of various countries, especially naval special forces, have begun to learn it. Chen Chen still remembered that there was a typical description of VBSS tactics in a movie he had watched in his previous life, which also proved that the popularity of this tactic was actually not low. However, its high popularity does not mean that everyone can play it. Even with very detailed intelligence and sufficient equipment, no one can guarantee a 100% success of an operation. Objectively speaking, this assault on the freighter was as dangerous as their previous direct confrontation with the regular army. Therefore, after a round of theoretical classes and confirming the basic capability limits of the Dongfeng Corps, Buck, as an instructor, frowned. He found Chen Chen alone and said, "This mission is very difficult. I have a basic understanding of your situation. You have strong individual abilities, good teamwork, and rich CQB combat experience. If it's on the ground, if it's a pure CQB battle, you won't suffer much if you fight against any elite special forces in the world. But the problem is that VBSS is not CQB after all. Just from the complexity of the terrain, VBSS and CQB are not on the same level. Without professional training, you simply won't be able to complete the task smoothly. A very simple example is that in an extremely narrow cabin, your team members are basically unable to use smoke bombs and stun grenades on a large scale. This alone is enough to significantly reduce your combat effectiveness. Moreover, you have to ensure the survival of the enemy as much as possible. How can it be so easy to capture him alive? So, my advice is actually, don't go for the standardized VBSS." Hearing Buck's words, Chen Chen nodded in agreement. Then he said, "This is why I came to you. We can't win this by normal means. We need you to tailor a set of tactics based on the characteristics of our team." "I see." Buck nodded slowly, then said, "The target is the cargo ship, and the enemy is JD elements. There are still nearly 40 hours before the operation begins, so there is plenty of time to prepare. So during this period of time, we will first complete the basic VBSS skills training. Let's consider the specific tactics after we have more detailed information." With the situation stabilized, the deal reached, and the abandoned pieces selected, the information about the cargo ship was quickly delivered to Chen Chen, and the level of detail actually far exceeded his imagination. Not only are there structural diagrams, performance, and heading information for the cargo ship, but there are also crew lists, passenger lists, and even the weapons and communication equipment carried by the passengers are clearly marked. It was obvious that someone had decided to completely distance themselves from the other force. They provided all the information they could and sold out the partners above completely. Chen Chen even suspected that if possible, they would even personally arrest people, bring all those JD elements back to Indonesia, and kill them in front of everyone as a witness to the peace talks among all parties. The reason why they did not take action was certainly not because of the untenable excuse of no law enforcement power on the high seas, but more because given their identities, it was really inconvenient for them to do something with such an obvious tendency. Therefore, even if the two parties have reached a settlement, the mission has not ended. But unlike what Chen Chen expected, the nature of the mission has changed. From the initial need to control the ship and capture as many JD elements on it alive as possible, it has now become killing the armed personnel and rescuing the hostages on the cargo ship. It seems that there has not been much change, but in fact, it is completely different. On the phone, listening to Xiaoyu's explanation of the latest intelligence. Chen Chen asked with confusion and helplessness. So we really won't continue to investigate? Once we kill these JD elements, our mission is over. For such a large-scale conspiracy, they dragged out a little Karami to take the blame? What about the promise to drag the Americans into this? What about the promise to bomb the aircraft carrier? Hearing Chen Chen's words, Xiaoyu laughed and asked, "Who told you that? How dare you say such a thing? Stop making a fuss. The matter is largely over. Everyone got what they wanted, and we solved the problems that needed to be solved urgently. The confrontation and checks and balances between countries often depend on the right timing. When the heat is reached, it is time to stop. If it's overcooked, it won't be beautiful. Haven't you heard that governing a big country is like cooking a small fish? Our foreign affairs work is actually the same. But we still have a choice. I'll try to capture the people up there and send them directly back to the north instead of sending them back to Indonesia. What do you think? That I treat you as my brother, and you treat me as your cousin? If you really do that, all our previous efforts will be in vain. Don't think too much. Just finish the task according to the plan. The equipment you need will be delivered in 4 hours. If there are additional requirements, it will arrive within 20 hours anyway. Any other questions?" Hearing Xiaoyu's words, Chen Chen shook his head subconsciously. But soon he suddenly asked, "Since ISK is going to die anyway, it doesn't matter who kills them. So why not just leave it to the Americans to kill them? Logically speaking, they're the force that wants to kill all these people the most. Even if we don't do anything, these ISK members can't leave alive, right? In that case, why should we get involved?" Xiaoyu on the other end of the phone was speechless after hearing Chen Chen's question. After a long while, she finally spoke. "ISK is a dog, but it is not a domestic dog. It is just a wild dog that has not been tamed yet. Their base is not in Indonesia, but in Syria. Do you think the Americans want them to live? It's just that after they die, the losses that the Americans may face are greater than the cost of saving them. It's all about weighing interests. Don't think the CIA is too stupid. Okay, stop complaining. The previous mission was to let you snatch people from them, but now it's just to let you kill people under their noses. The difficulty has been reduced by more than an order of magnitude. What else is there to complain about?" Now it was Chen Chen's turn to be speechless. He opened his mouth several times but finally swallowed the curse words. What do you mean by it's just about killing someone right under their noses? Although the freighter's route is more than 1,000 kilometers away from the aircraft carrier formation, can you guarantee that there are no other forces in the nearby waters? If there is a slight mistake in the intelligence, then you will have to confront the navy of the world's most powerful country head-on. Well, a mercenary group of a dozen people, armed with rifles, sitting in a small boat. Then in front of this mercenary group, there are FA-18 and MH-60s in the air, Arleigh Burke and Ticonderoga on the water, and there may even be Ohio underwater. This scene gives people a headache just thinking about it, and Xiaoyu actually said it so lightly. But there is no way. What can I do? Can I still turn against you? Therefore, Chen Chen could only swallow his anger and continue to confirm. Are you sure they won't provide escort protection for the freighter? I mean, if they send warships to escort us, what should we do? Hearing his words, Xiaoyu replied solemnly, "Impossible. They won't do such a sensitive thing. Of course, I don't rule out the possibility that they will go to rescue after receiving the distress signal from the cargo ship, but rescue also takes time. So, you must act quickly. We must clear out all JD elements on the cargo ship before they arrive, and then evacuate quickly. For the specific arrangements, you can make the decision based on the detailed intelligence. If you feel you can't do it, we can find another way. This cargo ship will eventually dock in Jayapura, and we may be able to find other opportunities. But the difficulty will increase a lot." Understood. Chen Chen didn't say anything more. After a few brief conversations, he hung up the phone. Now that the background and purpose of the mission are completely clear, the next thing to do is to plan a specific action strategy. Buck's training of the Dongfeng Corps has lasted for 12 hours. The high-intensity training has allowed everyone to quickly become familiar with the VBSS tactics. This team has barely reached the standard of being able to fight, but whether it can fight well depends on the execution of specific tactics. 20 hours after the freighter passed through the high seas northwest of Sulawesi, in the temporary combat command room of the Dongfeng Corps, Chen Chen stood in front of the whiteboard and gave the first pre-war briefing to all members involved in the operation. He pointed to the photo on the whiteboard and began to introduce. As you can see in the picture, our target this time is the 10,000-ton general cargo ship Bangao, which has a full load displacement of about 15,000 tons, a length of 103 meters, a width of 29 meters, a height of 21 meters, a full load draft of 12 meters, and a freeboard height of 2.75 meters. The maximum speed when fully loaded is 15 knots, or about 28 kilometers per hour. There is a simple ladder at the rear of the ship, but it will most likely be retracted during the voyage. We need to use a ladder to board the ship at night, which is extremely dangerous. But the good news is that our night vision equipment has good performance and can fully support night operations. After boarding the ship, we must quickly take control of the captain's room, control the ship's broadcasting system, keep the ship's radio and transponder systems working properly, and avoid exposure risks as much as possible. Afterwards, we will clean all the cabins on the ship one by one, identify the JD elements, and decapitate them. That was the hardest part of the whole operation. According to intelligence, all JD members have already disguised themselves in secular ways. We cannot simply judge them based on their clothing. The only reliable criterion is race. The JD elements we need to eliminate this time are all Arabs. Their typical facial features are shown in the picture. Advertisement as he spoke. Chen Chen pointed to several photos on the whiteboard. In theory, no one can fail to see the difference between Arabs and East Asians, but that is only in daily environments and under conditions of sufficient light. During the VBSS operation, it was very difficult to identify the target by appearance after wearing night vision goggles. But Chen Chen had no other choice but to ask his team members to remember the facial features of Arabs as much as possible to improve the recognition efficiency. After confirming that everyone had seen the photo, Chen Chen continued, "We have accurate intelligence in our hands. The JD elements on the cargo ship Bangao are carrying a large number of weapons. These included 12 rifles of various models, 24 pistols, at least 15 grenades, and a small amount of other homemade explosives. Once the operation begins, we will immediately face the risk of a frenzied counterattack by the enemy. So the principle of this operation is very simple. That is, to cause as much damage as possible and weaken the enemy's resistance as much as possible before they react. Our principle of firing is to fire first. They are unlikely to launch a suicide attack, but they will certainly make full use of the hostages they have. We must do our best to ensure that they do not have this opportunity, but if a hostage situation does occur, we will still prioritize killing the enemy. Now let's start discussing the specific combat plan. If you have any ideas, you can speak up first. After the words were spoken, a brief silence fell in the command room. No one, including Buck, spoke immediately. Instead, they were carefully thinking and summarizing the information provided by Chen Chen. After a moment, Buck raised his hand and asked, "So this operation is different from what we expected? The combat mission has changed from control to cleanup, right?" "That's right." Chen Chen answered immediately, and Buck nodded slowly, then said, "Then this is a standard VBSS operation." "Yes, standard VBSS action." Before Chen Chen finished speaking, Buck interrupted him and said, "But you don't have the basic qualities to carry out the VBSS operation. If you start it rashly, the result will be annihilation of the whole army." "Are you sure?" Chen Chen asked subconsciously. He had not expected to turn the Dongfeng Corps into a professional VBSS team through a dozen hours of training. The reason for introducing Buck was actually to control the risks to the greatest extent possible. In his opinion, this battle may be difficult to fight and may be winnable, but the Dongfeng Corps will definitely face major challenges and there will be casualties. But even though his judgment was pessimistic enough in Buck's opinion, it was still too optimistic. Completely annihilated? Chen Chen felt that Buck was exaggerating a bit. After all, the other party was just a group of JD elements with light weapons. Most of them had not received professional CQB training and their combat skills were not mature. Moreover, those JD elements didn't even have bulletproof vests. In a head-on confrontation, the Dongfeng Corps could even knock them down with bullets. In this situation, Buck could actually predict that the whole army would be annihilated. Looking at Chen Chen's puzzled expression, Buck explained, "You still think VBSS is too simple?" "Yes, we did conduct more than 10 hours of intensive training, but the content of these trainings was extremely basic and simple. We became familiar with the steps, the different types of ship structures, the ways of breaching doors that can be used on cargo ships, and the use of special bunkers. But the problem is that you can't adapt to the real maritime environment through simple training. It is possible that just the turbulence caused by wind and waves would cause the team members who entered the cabin to prepare for the search to lose their balance and fall. And in the cramped environment of the cabin, there are usually only one or two enemies that can be faced at the same time. If one person becomes incapacitated, the entire team will be paralyzed. There are only 12 of you in total. How many opportunities do you have for trial and error? In addition, the lighting, smoke, and complex terrain inside the cabin may cause uncontrollable influences. Night vision equipment will be affected. A strong flashlight flashing from the corner can make you lose your vision. It is even possible that a kitchen knife around the corner can take your life. What's more, the enemies we are facing have all kinds of explosives in their hands. There is absolutely no chance of winning. There is no need to even fight." Hearing this, Chen Chen nodded slowly. He understood what Buck meant. The other party's words were very direct, even sharp, but from a professional perspective, his judgment was indeed not mixed with any watered. But it was obvious that when he said there was no chance of winning, he only meant that there was no chance of winning under the premise of standard VBSS operations. "So," Chen Chen looked at Buck and said expectantly, "I understand. So, you're saying that you're going to use some other type of tactics?" Buck kept his mouth tightly shut. He subconsciously touched the gauze wrapped around his head. After hesitating for a long time, he finally spoke. "It's not that I plan to use other types of tactics. I do have another solution, but it's up to you to decide whether to use it or not." "Tell me about it," Chen Chen answered without hesitation. Buck took a deep breath and asked, "Our goal is just to eliminate all JD elements, right? And to ensure the safety of the crew as much as possible." "I understand. What I mean is, the freighter itself is not actually under consideration." "Yes. According to your information, this freighter is actually a 30-year-old ship, and its current value is no more than $2 million US. Also, this is a general cargo ship, transporting low-value cargo. Then to be honest, it won't be a big deal if it sinks. Someone's going to pay for it. So, we still have to conduct VBSS operations. But we only execute the first half. Approach, board, and then sink it. If you can't catch the mouse in the house, burning the house down and waiting at the door is also a good idea, isn't it?" Blowing up the ship sounds unreliable, but after thinking about it carefully, Chen Chen found that this is indeed the most reliable plan that his side can use. In fact, there are several prerequisites for this combat operation. First, the Dongfeng Corps is not a professional VBSS team and cannot guarantee the smoothness of the operation process. Second, the Eastern Corps must ensure the survival of innocent crew members as much as possible, while at the same time ensuring that as many JD elements as possible are killed. Third, the JD elements have weapons, and they will kill civilians. Under these three prerequisites, what the Dongfeng Corps faced was actually the classic Judgment Day dilemma that Chen Chen had seen in other literary works in his previous life. Those crew members who were potentially hijacked are the data that the Dongfeng Corps wants to retrieve, and the JD elements are the ETO organization they want to eliminate. No matter what kind of conventional actions were taken, the Dongfeng Corps could not guarantee the safety of the crew because reality was not an American blockbuster. He is not a blonde, blue-eyed, divorced retired veteran, nor does he have a heroic, scissor-legged pea friend, a bald, 2-meter-tall muscular teammate, or a timid, gossipy minority hacker. There is no way he could have worn a diving suit and used a laser knife to cut a big hole in the bottom of the ship and sneaked into the cabin. There is no way he could have competed with his teammates by throwing knives and showing off his fists and feet. It is even more impossible for him to say to the last boss, "I've been looking for you for a long time, and then drop his gun to fight him, and finally kill the boss with the encouragement of his friends or family, and walk away after saying, "We finally did it." The reality is probably that they were discovered by the lurking guards as soon as they arrived on the deck, and then the JD elements quickly took control of all the hostages, hid in the complex cabins and fought against the Dongfeng Corps with guns, and relied on their absolutely reckless and fearless mentality to wear down all the Dongfeng Corps members bit by bit. So, in this case, it is a very sensible idea to choose a more extreme option. What? You said bombing the ship could cause civilian casualties? Come on, is this not possible with standard VBSS tactics? Huh? You said the success rate of bombing the ship is not high, and there is a possibility that the mission will fail due to early exposure? Then wouldn't it be easier to be exposed directly on board the ship? Oh, you said that bombing a ship might be considered a terrorist act? Come on, a mercenary group conducting VBSS operations against a cargo ship without any official endorsement is already sensitive enough. So overall, the potential costs of these two options are completely on the same level. But anyone with a brain can see that the plan of blowing up the ship is much safer than the standard VBSS. So Chen Chen approved Buck's plan almost without hesitation. After the plan was finalized, their training focus began to change. At the same time, Chen Chen asked Xiaoyu to update the equipment. A few hours later, a batch of customized equipment was quickly delivered to Manado in northern Sulawesi. These included a medium-sized marine transport vessel produced by SEMA of the Netherlands, 2 U-shaped electric rubber boats, a batch of C4 explosives, as well as preset silencers, detonation equipment, scuba, and underwater communication systems. But of course, all the equipment related to diving is for preparedness, and Chen Chen has no intention of using it unless it is necessary. After all, their plan was simplified to the extreme. Obtain the scheduled route of the cargo ship, and the transport boat will take the rubber boat to lie in wait near the route. After discovering the cargo ship, chase it close in the dark, and after getting close to it, deploy bombs in multiple watertight compartments under the waterline. The bombing will cause the cargo ship to tilt and force the JD elements to evacuate. Then whether to capture or kill, that was up to Chen Chen. 10 hours later, all preparations were ready. 12 Dongfeng Corps members, plus Buck, flew to Manado in a small plane. This time, they didn't even have to go through security checks. Firearms, explosives, and electronic equipment were all loaded onto the plane. Nearly an hour later, the plane landed in Manado. Chen Chen led the team to the dock and saw the ship that had been ready. Is the magnet ready? As soon as he saw the equipment, Buck immediately asked. It's ready. It's included in the detonation equipment package. Everything is pre-made and can be used right away. Take it out and let me see it. Hearing his words, Chen Chen immediately ordered Li Bang to start unpacking, and soon, a total of 8 prefabricated detonation devices were lined up in front of everyone. Buck checked them one by one and then said, "It's basically no problem. The people who make this stuff are very professional. Metal frame, plastic elastic delivery rod, backup bonding device, twist-off release structure. Very detailed. Since we were able to prepare these things in such a short time, there should be basically no problems with the other equipment. No need to check. We can just sail away and sort out our equipment on board." So anxious? Chen Chen asked doubtfully. There are still 7 hours before the cargo ship passes through. The sea conditions in the Celebes Sea are not stable. We have to observe ahead of time. Buck interrupted Chen Chen and continued to explain. If the wind direction or wave performance changes, our tracking plan must be adjusted accordingly. After all, we can only use 2 speedboats, and there are many uncontrollable factors. If we arrive early, we will at least have time to develop a new response plan. Clear. Chen Chen did not ask any more questions, but quickly organized the team according to Buck's request. Everyone checked their equipment for the last time, and then boarded the ship one by one. The transport boat started quickly and began to accelerate slowly, heading towards the northern part of the Celebes Sea. 2 hours later, the transport boat arrived at the designated sea area and began to cruise around in a leisure manner. The other members of the Dongfeng Corps were all hiding in the cabin, while Chen Chen and Buck stood at the side of the ship, holding fishing rods in their hands, pretending to be tourists going out to sea. This operation may not go as smoothly as we expected. Buck began to speak. Maybe not. It depends on the attitude of the United States. Chen Chen answered without comment. But you should be prepared for the worst. I mean, if that cargo ship appears and you find that there are other ships escorting it, what should you do? Buck's question caused Chen Chen to fall into a brief silence. After a moment, he opened his mouth and answered, "I'll do what I have to do. Aren't you worried about their retaliation? This retaliation is likely to happen on the spot." "Of course I am worried." Chen Chen shook his head and continued, "But there is no alternative. This is a risk that must be taken. We are a mercenary group, not an official organization. We have our own way of doing things, or in a sense, we are a group of outlaws. We can take risks for our own benefit. It's not that different from what some people in the Indonesian military do, right? That's a huge difference." Buck smiled and said nothing. It was 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and there were still 4 hours before the Bangau cargo ship arrived at the designated sea area. The setting sun was slowly falling toward the sea level, and the orange-yellow light reflected the sea surface into a large piece of shining broken glass. Chen Chen felt a little dizzy, so he turned his eyes away. Advertisement, and just at this moment, a dolphin happened to jump out of the sea. It is impossible for it to detect the murderous intentions from humans in such a peaceful environment. Perhaps for other creatures in this sea, this is indeed just an ordinary day. At the same time, thousands of kilometers away at sea, in the command room of the bridge of an aircraft carrier formation, a middle-aged man in military uniform was carefully reading the intelligence in front of him, and standing next to him was the formation's commander-in-chief. The silence between the two lasted for several minutes until the middle-aged man finished reading all the intelligence and finally said, "This mission is not easy. We are now in the Maluku Sea, nearly 300 nautical miles away from the scheduled combat area. Although we are still within the combat radius of carrier-based aircraft, we must cross Indonesian airspace in a straight line, and do so multiple times. The political and public opinion risks are too great, and the benefits we might get are too low in comparison. If we have to let the carrier-based aircraft take a detour, our range will have to increase by an additional 400 nautical miles, which is close to the maximum combat radius that the Fa-18 can achieve. Even if we rush to the designated sea area, we will not be able to provide effective escort. Similarly, if the fleet enters the Celebes Sea directly, we can indeed shorten the ineffective flight time of carrier-based aircraft, but the uncontrollable chain reaction caused by large-scale mobilization will not be enough in terms of time. It's very troublesome. Those CIA idiots, they shouldn't have chosen this evacuation route in the first place. We have almost no available forces. In the Celebes Sea. Stupid. The Celebes Sea has become a power vacuum for us. We can only watch those people being killed. Hearing his words, the editor shook his head helplessly, and then said, "This is not something we could have anticipated. No one expected that the Indonesian military and the president would reach an agreement in such a short time. Our line of communication has basically been completely severed. No, it should be said that no one expected that Bashir would not die. They acted much faster than we expected. Okay, stop complaining. What we need now is a practical plan. Now tell me, is there any other option? Hearing what the editor said, the man nodded helplessly and replied, "We only have one plan. Just notify the cargo ship to stop and wait, and then arrange for others to board the ship to escort it." Others? MPRI. The editor frowned and continued. MPRI's forces deployed in Indonesia have basically been withdrawn. If they need to be deployed, they can only be deployed from Singapore. Isn't this going far away instead of near? I'm not talking about our own strength. The man shook his head and explained, "I've already said that the Celebes Sea is a power vacuum for us right now, but it's not a power vacuum for everyone. As far as I know, the British Gurkha Rifles at the Sri Yam Army Base in Brunei are now conducting training and exchanges with the Malaysian side in the waters east of Taiwan. They have 2 Super Lynx helicopters. It only takes less than an hour to take off from Taiwan and reach the designated combat area. There's still enough time to communicate now." The editor's eyes lit up. He suddenly realized that this was indeed an excellent plan. It can not only solve one's own problem of force projection, but also does not require one to bear any additional consequences. The most important thing is to let the British side intervene in this matter, and the CIA must communicate on its own. That means the military can completely get out of this matter. What a good calculation. What a good plan. As for what conditions the CIA will use to convince Celia, it has nothing to do with them. The only difficulty is that after taking off, the British helicopter cannot return by the same route, but must find a place to land. After all, their total flight range was close to 700 kilometers, which was already the range limit of the Lynx helicopter. "That's what we'll do." The editor spoke without hesitation. Then, he immediately picked up the phone at hand and sent out a series of messages. 40 minutes later, at a helicopter airport near Taiwan, 2 helicopters were ready to take off. The commander of the Gurkha Rifles stood near the airport, giving the final briefing to the team members who were about to participate in the operation. "Our target this time is a cargo ship sailing on the Celebes Sea. We are carrying out an escort and protection mission for the important personnel on the cargo ship. According to reliable intelligence, the cargo ship is likely to be attacked by unknown armed elements. The other side is a professional armed personnel with rich special operations experience. They are very powerful and very deadly. I'll give you some straightforward information. They are the protagonists of the Cunning incident. They are the mercenaries that annihilated the MPRI team that included 12 former Navy SEALs. Don't underestimate the enemy. Don't be afraid. This will be the first actual combat test you will face. Our equipment is superior to theirs, and our training maturity is much higher than theirs. After quickly rappelling the cargo ship, we must quickly occupy favorable terrain and organize defense. The flight distance is too long. The helicopter will not be able to provide us with cover after the delivery. We have to rely on ourselves. Watch your butts. Be safe. Now everyone, set off." "Yes, sir." At the order, 22 fully armed Gurkha gunmen immediately began to board the plane. They moved quickly and professionally, boarding the plane one after another and getting into the cabin. Then, the ground crew waved their glow sticks and guided the helicopter to take off slowly. The strong wind stirred up by the rotor mixed with the sea breeze, blowing the waves into layers of white folds. In the dim starlight, 2 helicopters flew across the sea like ghosts. In 90 minutes, they will reach the southern waters of the Celebes Sea, where they will catch up with the cargo ship heading east. What they didn't know was that at this moment, at their scheduled meeting point, there was already a team waiting quietly. When the 2 sides meet, a battle of blood and fire will be inevitable. According to the reply signal, the target ship has reached the position of 2.4 N, 123.3 E, 30 kilometers due west of us and heading due east. We expect to encounter the target ship in 1 hour. Without aerial reconnaissance, we cannot obtain the specific location information of the ship. We need to get at least 2 kilometers closer before we can determine the location of the ship with the naked eye. I suggest that we proceed westwards and meet the cargo ship based on the ship's reply signal. The shorter the waiting time, the less chance there is of deviation. If we miss, we also have the opportunity to make a second adjustment. On the Dongfeng Corps' transport ship, Buck spoke while looking at the nautical chart. He was not an experienced sailor or navigator, but combined with the information provided by the captain, the suggestions he put forward were indeed much more perfect than the solutions Chen Chen could think of himself. So Chen Chen nodded immediately and replied, "Okay, let's go now. What are the combat conditions?" "It's perfect. The wind and waves are small, and the ambient brightness is relatively high, which helps us to find large targets on the sea. We can turn off most of the lights and rely on navigation to proceed. We will definitely find them before they find us." "No problem," Chen Chen answered decisively, and then the order was passed to the cockpit. The transport ship was fully powered and headed towards the target area. At full speed, the transport ship can reach a speed of 36 kilometers per hour. In addition, it is moving in the opposite direction of the cargo ship. In theory, it only takes 20 minutes at most for everyone to find a cargo ship on the sea. Chen Chen stood at the bow, holding a telescope in his hand and constantly scanning the distant horizon, while Buck held the bow railing tightly and observed the faint light on the sea with his peripheral vision. A few minutes later, when Chen Chen hadn't found any trace of the ship, Buck suddenly said, "Here they come." Chen Chen immediately used a telescope to observe in the direction of his finger. After some searching, he indeed saw a cargo ship sailing on the sea. He couldn't see the cargo ship's hull number from his angle, but from its appearance, this was undoubtedly the Bangao cargo ship they were looking for. Target found, about 2 kilometers away. Turn off the lights and keep silent. Lower the speedboat. Everyone aboard, prepare for the assault. Receive. The order was given, and everyone moved in an instant. With the assistance of the sailors on board, the 2 rubber boats quickly completed the entire process from inflation to launching. And at this time, the lights of the Bangao gradually became conspicuous. Chen Chen led the team to board the boat first, and then he turned around to help Buck, who was injured on the head and had difficulty moving. In order to prevent the wound from being soaked by seawater, he wrapped a circle of plastic wrap around his head. Although it was not breathable, it was not a problem for him to hold on for a while. The electric motor of the rubber boat has been started, and the noise of the propeller is not harsh in the wide sea environment. Shi Dakai and Li Bang, who had received ship driving training before, controlled 2 rubber boats respectively and kept moving forward in the direction of the cargo ship. On calm seas, the maximum speed of a rubber boat can reach 40 kilometers per hour, while at this time, the cargo ship speed is only about 25 kilometers per hour. In just a few minutes, the rubber boat intercepting from south to north had approached to a position about 500 meters away from the Bangao cargo ship, but Chen Chen did not order to directly approach. Instead, he made an arc and passed by the cargo ship, moving forward along the cargo ship's wake from behind. Taking this opportunity, the Dongfeng Corps quickly conducted an observation of the cargo ship's deck. 2 guards have been identified at the bow and stern. There is a searchlight at the stern, but the light range is very small and the brightness is insufficient. It should be a temporary setting. The sentry is not very alert. You can get closer. Clear. Chen Chen answered in a low voice, and then ordered, "Shut off the engine and paddle manually to approach." At this time, the 2 rubber boats of the Dongfeng Corps were nearly 400 meters away from the stern of the cargo ship. Logically speaking, relying on manual paddling, the maximum speed was more than 20 kilometers per hour. It was impossible for them to catch up with the moving cargo ship. However, this is also a key skill that Buck taught the Dongfeng Corps, that is, riding the waves. Relying on the wake caused by large ships, the rubber boat with a small draft can obtain a forward acceleration. Combined with the reaction force of manual paddling, the speed of the rubber boat can even be pulled to more than 35 kilometers. Moreover, with the help of the wake cover, the noise generated by the paddling process will also be masked, further enhancing the concealment. The distance of 400 meters kept shortening, and in the final stage, Chen Chen commanded 2 rubber boats to overtake the cargo ship and approach from the starboard side. At this time, the sentries on the ship knew nothing about this. The 2 small boats, even leisurely, turned on their engines again and continued to maintain a parallel position with the cargo ship at a low speed. Yang Shu with the back patted Chen Chen on the shoulder. Chen Chen looked back and made a series of gestures, meaning the bomb is ready. Chen Chen nodded and responded with gestures, then directed Shi Dakai to speed up and find the predetermined blasting point according to the structural diagram that he had already mastered. The Dao cargo ship has a total of 4 watertight transverse bulkheads. According to the design standards, when fully loaded, even if 3 of them are lost, the ship can remain floating on the water with an extremely high waterline. If all the watertight compartments were lost at once, it would take at least 3 hours for the ship to sink completely. This time is more than enough for the crew members who need to evacuate, but it is impossible for Chen Chen to just blow it up and be done with it. Because if the water inflow into the ship's watertight compartments is different from expectations, causing the hull to become unbalanced or even break, the chances of escape for the crew in the cabin will be greatly reduced, and a rescue operation may very likely turn into a terrorist activity. Therefore, Chen Chen had already found the structural engineer of Qingshan Group and calculated the best blasting point of the Dao cargo ship. After arriving at the blasting point, Chen Chen did not drop explosives immediately, but smashed the prepared oily fluorescent agent onto the hull. The marking has been completed. Next, even in dim light, it is unlikely that the operator responsible for placing the explosives will make too much deviation. Everything was ready, and Chen Chen whispered, "Begin placing explosives." "Understood, start delivering." After a brief reply, 4 long sticks were extended from the 2 rubber boats. On top of the 4 long sticks is C4, with an explosion time already set in advance. The 2-kilogram equivalent of each bomb is enough to tear the hull apart. And after the bomb explodes, the simultaneous flooding caused by the 4 large holes will cause the cargo ship to tilt to the right instantly. Of course, it will not capsize immediately. All cargo ships must undergo a series of stability tests. As long as the water inflow angle is below the threshold, a ship will most likely be able to quickly reach a new balance. Tilt balance. This was exactly the effect Chen Chen wanted. He didn't believe that the ISK members had much experience in sea sailing, and after the ship tilted, they would most likely be the first to lose their ability to move. Soon, all the bombs were placed. Chen Chen ordered to shut down the engine and rowed away from the cargo ship. 3 minutes left to explosion. Prepare the transport boat, follow my coordinates, and come closer to pick us up. Advertisement, be prepared to rescue. Someone may fall into the water. Clear. The voice of Ping Chuandi, who stayed behind, came from the radio. Chen Chen took a deep breath and turned off all the lights on the rubber boat. In an instant, the sea became silent again. The noise from the diesel turbine of the Bangao gradually faded away. Its speed of 25 kilometers per hour was enough for it to travel 1 kilometer in 3 minutes. The searchlight at the stern never worked from beginning to end. After all, its brightness was too low and its coverage area was too small. Everything went very smoothly. Looking at the Bangao in the distance, Chen Chen took a deep breath and gave the order. "Everyone prepare for battle. Approach the target at full speed. The enemy is likely to take the crew hostage and evacuate. Be careful to identify them. Pay attention to the situation of cargo ship crew members falling into the water, and report it to the transport ship in time, so that the transport ship can carry out the rescue. Clear. The reply came from the headset again. Chen Chen let out a breath and silently watched the countdown on his watch. 20 seconds. 10 seconds. He raised his head, and then, as expected, for tragic sparks burst out from the right side of the dhow. Boom! A violent explosion swept across the entire sea surface, but because the blasting location was planned in advance, the flames of the explosion did not damage the main structure of the hull, nor did it ignite the most dangerous fuel tank. From a distance, the sentry on the deck was already stunned by the explosion. The dozing man jumped up with a start and subconsciously raised the gun in his hand. But when he looked around, he did not find any enemy. Of course, he couldn't see the enemy, because now, their biggest enemy was right under their feet. 4 huge holes pierced all the watertight compartments of the dhow, and seawater rushed in at a very high speed. In just a dozen seconds, the hull of the ship had tilted. All the lights on the cargo ship were turned on, and the crew and passengers, who had not yet fallen asleep, quickly ran onto the deck. But the deck at this moment was somewhat different from the deck they were familiar with. A crew member who was obviously not familiar with sea sailing fell down just after getting out of the cabin door. After finally getting up, he fell down again because of unstable center of gravity. Soon, the dhow sent a general distress signal in the GMDSS system, and the cause of the accident they reported was an engine explosion. That's right, they could never have imagined that the ship was blown up on purpose, because this doesn't fit their perception at all. The sailors have also taken action. They went down the ladder at the stern and roughly saw the location of the leak. Everyone was shouting and screaming in nervousness or fear, but in contrast, everything on the Dongfeng Corps side seemed extremely calm. They silently watched the crew members who were struggling to survive, without the slightest intention of stepping forward to rescue them. This was Chen Chen's plan. Or rather, it was Buck's plan. They had to wait until all the crew members on the ship were evacuated to the lifeboats, and then rely on their advantages in firepower and mobility to control it. At this time, the captain of the dhow had already found out the damage to the ship and confirmed that it was impossible to save the ship. He quickly organized to launch lifeboats, but at this critical moment, the JD members on the ship started an internal conflict, as Chen Chen expected. A crew member who was trying to board the ship was forced back to the deck with a gun. The others wanted to resist, but after the first round of gunfire, the unarmed crew members could only flee. The crew members who had no time to escape continued to lower the lifeboat under the coercion of a JD member. Chen Chen counted the number of passengers on the lifeboat one by one. Then he was surprised to find that this lifeboat could only accommodate 24 people. This was the only lifeboat on the entire freighter that in fact, the crew of a freighter of this tonnage is only about 20 people, and the dhow runs a short distance route, so the number of crew members required is even less. Logically speaking, one lifeboat would be enough for them, and there was no need to have more. This brings a huge advantage to the Dongfeng Corps' operation, because it means that the crew on this lifeboat are only JD elements. Faced with the gunpoint, the crew members on the dhow cargo ship were almost in despair. In fact, they did not know the identity of these militants. They just took money from certain people and did some not-so-legal things for them, just like all the ships sailing on this route. They didn't know how many times they had done this kind of mission, but they never imagined that this seemingly ordinary mission could actually cost them their lives. Looking at the passengers who were constantly boarding the lifeboat, someone in the crew was shouting angrily, but his voice seemed to have angered the JD member in charge of surveillance, who raised his gun without hesitation and pointed it at his head. The crew member took a step back in fear, but the JD member, who was already out of his rage, had no intention of letting him go. He hit the crewman's head again and again with the butt of his gun, as if blaming himself for this accident. Seeing this scene, Chen Chen made a quick decision. There is no need to wait any longer. Now, there were a total of 21 JD elements in the lifeboat and 3 on the deck, 2 of whom were completely exposed to the firing range of the Dongfeng Corps. This is the perfect time to launch a raid. If it was earlier, the personnel would not be gathered together, and the killing efficiency would be greatly reduced. If it's too late when these JD elements recover from their panic, they might kill people to vent their anger. So he immediately gave the order. Sniper ready, clear the target, shoot the lifeboat, and kill all the people on it. As soon as he finished speaking, Chen Chen was responded by a series of gunshots. Bang, bang. The 2 shots fired by Yang Shu and Shi Dakai accurately hit the JD elements on the deck at a distance of 200 meters, knocking them down directly. The M240S and Li Bang and the short-legged man's hands continued to spew flames, pouring bullets onto the lifeboat. At this moment, no one can escape the punishment of firepower. Someone tried to climb back onto the deck, but his body was shot down in midair and fell directly into the dark sea. In just a few seconds, 23 JD elements had fallen, and the last one, whom the Dongfeng Corps could not see, had been shot dead by the crew member who picked up the gun. Everything went extremely smoothly, and it could even be said that it was much smoother than Chen Chen had imagined. But at this moment, he suddenly heard the sound of a helicopter in the air. His heart skipped a beat, and then he made an almost instinctive judgment. Help! Get on board! Damn it, the Americans are coming! 2 rubber boats quickly approached the Bangao cargo ship, set up the ladder within a few seconds, and began to board the ship one by one. This was the most dangerous moment because the Dongfeng Corps had no power to fight back against the possible airstrikes, and they couldn't even see the position of the helicopters in the air. However, any modern military helicopter, as long as it had basic observation equipment, could easily spot large ships on the sea, and then find the rubber boats firing nearby. Chen Chen's heart was almost stretched to its limit. While everyone was boarding the ship, he also issued new orders to the transport boat that was approaching from a distance. Ping Chuan, turn on all the lights on the transport boat and send out a radio distress signal to disrupt the helicopter's judgment. Turn on the searchlight and find the location of the helicopter. Contact the rear and confirm the ownership of the helicopter. Clear. Ping Chuan answered quickly, and Chen Chen's brain was also working rapidly. The number of helicopters that can appear on this sea is extremely limited because at this time, they are nearly 200 kilometers away from the port of Manado, which is a bit too far for most civilian helicopters. If something unexpected happens during the voyage, the helicopter may not be able to fly back to the coastline to land. At the same time, it is impossible for Indonesia to send a helicopter rescue at this time, because they know better than anyone what will happen to the ship. In other words, the helicopters are most likely from the military of other countries around the Celebes Sea. Philippines? No, there is no U.S. military base there yet. Due to the expiration of the lease and the rent dispute, the base originally set up in the Philippines has been withdrawn and will not return until 2016. Malaysia? They probably won't bother with such trivial matters. Only the aircraft carrier formation is consistent in terms of distance and logic. See how you said before that the U.S. aircraft carrier formation is in the Banda Sea. In 2 days, they can almost sail to the northern part of the Maluku Sea. Therefore, Chen Chen's nervousness is not without reason. As it turned out, his vigilance did save everyone in the Dongfeng Corps. Just when the entire team had completed boarding and was hiding in the bunker, the first round of attacks from the air finally arrived. Bang, 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 bang. The tracer bullets drew long arcs in the air, creating a series of waves on the sea surface on both sides of the Bangao cargo ship. Chen Chen subconsciously looked up into the sky, until at this moment, the black silhouettes of 2 helicopters finally appeared in his sight. But it was a little strange. It was not any carrier-based or anti-submarine helicopter he was familiar with. You know, the American shipborne helicopters are mainly SH-60 and MH-60R, with a small number of CH-53K, or in special circumstances, attack helicopters like Apache will be put on board. But there is no doubt that the helicopter you saw does not belong to any of them. That's strange. Chen Chen hid behind the bunker and spoke subconsciously. Where did this helicopter come from? It didn't even shoot us directly, but fired warning shots? Hearing his words, Shi Dekai, who was not far away, replied, I can see the movement of the helicopter. They seem to be hovering and observing, as if they are looking for a place to land. Are you kidding me? Chen Chen was completely confused. What the fuck is this for? Can't you see the ship is sinking? We boarded the boat to hide from you. And now you want to follow us? This is totally illogical, okay? If it was really a helicopter sent by the United States, they should not have adopted such a conservative approach after witnessing the killing of their important personnel. It's not like you don't have a heavy machine gun on your helicopter. Thinking of this, Chen Chen immediately said, hide in the cabin and try to establish contact with the helicopter. Find a crew member to question. Find out what's going on. Clear. Everyone started moving immediately. At this time, the tilt angle of the Bangao was still very small, so everyone moved relatively quickly. Chen Chen entered the bow cabin, and all the crew members gathered inside raised their hands, shouting, Don't move! Don't move! Put your hands where I can see them. Who's the captain? We are the Indonesian SMP. We are entrusted by the police to carry out the mission and eliminate the JD elements. We will bear all the losses on the ship. Where's the captain? Report the situation. I have to say that in Indonesia, the SMP name is indeed quite useful. After Chen Chen revealed his identity, a man in uniform immediately stood up. Chen Chen didn't say much nonsense, but asked directly, how long will it take for the ship to sink? I don't know. The sea conditions are relatively stable now. Maybe we can hold out for another 3 hours. But the lower compartments will certainly be flooded. That's enough. 3 hours is enough time for the Navy and the Air Force to complete a decisive showdown. But now, he must first figure out where the 2 helicopters in the air came from. Ping Xuan, has your identity been confirmed? Not yet, but Indonesia has ruled it out. Ping Xuan's reply came over the radio, and Chen Chen frowned again. He already had a guess in his mind, but this guess seemed a little too incredible no matter from which angle he looked at it. Could it be the British guy from the Salea base? Thinking about it carefully, it is indeed possible. After all, the Gurkha troops are a rather special group of troops. They are under the management of the British regular army, but are not part of the real service sequence. Instead, they are recruited in the name of employment. These people generally sign a 15-year employment contract with the UK. In form, they are somewhat similar to the French Legion, but are relatively more independent. Since 1915, this mercenary group has performed well in many wars in which the British participated, including the Falklands, the Gulf, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, etc. They are also a black glove, and it is perfect to deploy them in this type of battle. But the problem is that the Gurkha Rifle Regiment is basically active near the Surya base in Brunei. It is about 700 kilometers to fly from there. Isn't this long distance rate a bit too far? Thinking of this, Chen Chen immediately continued. Continue to observe and confirm the model of the helicopter. I've seen it, Super Bobcat. Ping Xuan answered without hesitation. At this moment, no matter how incredible Chen Chen's guess was, it was the only answer. The ones who really participated in the war were the Gurkha Rifles, and they were mercenaries from the 2nd Regiment of the Rifle Brigade stationed in Brunei. My goodness, the troops fighting jungle warfare are starting to use VBSS. This world is really crazy. But in this way, Chen Chen no longer has any worries. If the troops coming were regular troops from any country, Chen Chen would probably not be able to move freely. But they are mercenaries? Sorry, let's fight them first. Advertisement, so he immediately made new arrangements for everyone on the ship. Everyone disperse. Take up cover on the deck, but don't expose your position. Ping Xuan, keep a good watch and report the location of the rope drop in time. Disguise yourself as a civilian ship and don't reveal your identity. Li Gang, deploy smoke bombs on the deck to block the enemy's vision. Pay attention to the tilt of the deck. Don't throw it into the sea. Clear. Everyone answered immediately. And then the 12 people of the Dongfeng Corps, including Buck, all dispersed. Taking advantage of the time when the Gurkha Rifles flew around to patrol the deck, they decisively and quickly completed the deployment. In fact, the transshipment method of bulk carriers is different from that of common large container ships, especially on the routes near Indonesia. Due to economic constraints, the cargo loading method of these ships is also quite irregular. To give a simple example, if a normal container ship is a box-type heavy truck with 4 wheels at the front and 8 wheels at the rear, then a general cargo ship is a dump truck with a rear bucket. There were containers on the deck, but more of a mess of cargo loaded in the open air. This is the case with the cargo ship Bangao. The deck is littered with piles of pipes, steel frames, and even randomly placed second-hand cars. These things provide natural cover. Once you get inside, It is basically difficult to find any trace unless you observe from directly above. As smoke bombs were thrown one after another, the 11 people completed their concealment according to the groups of 3 combat teams. Buck, the wounded man, stayed near the captain's room and continued to monitor the crew. At this time, the 2 superlinks in the air had completed the observation of the battlefield environment, began to descend in altitude, and circled behind the Bangao cargo ship. This was a prelude to the upcoming attack. According to the basic requirements of VBSS tactics, when approaching from the air, helicopters will most of the time choose to fly over the sea and then suddenly rise and immediately execute a rope descent after reaching the predetermined position. In this case, the helicopter can minimize its exposure time and also use the cover of the nose machine gun to reduce the risk of being hit. Ping Chuan quickly reported what he had seen, while Chen Chen poked his head slightly out from behind a pile of bundled pipes and looked towards a Lynx helicopter located due north. The helicopter was diving continuously and was less than 50 meters away from the water surface. As it continued to get closer to the cargo ship, its sea-skimming altitude continued to decrease. After dropping to a certain threshold, the helicopter completely disappeared from Chen Chen's sight. Attention everyone, count down 20 seconds. Prepare to engage the enemy. Stay hidden. Chen Chen gave the order and counted down silently in his heart. Time seemed to freeze, and the 2 helicopters disappeared completely from everyone's sight like 2 ghosts. But the next second, a strong light suddenly rose from the side of the ship like the sunrise. Along with the lights, there was the violent flames of heavy machine guns firing wildly, and the continuous loud gunfire. Bullets poured out, and sparks flew on the deck. At the same time, 8 ropes were thrown down from the helicopter, and the mercenaries of the Gurkha gun regiment jumped out of the cabin nimbly, falling to the deck one after another. Grenade! Grenade! As soon as Chen Chen finished speaking, the blaster who had been prepared for a long time had already made his move. 4 grenades flew to 2 rappelling points respectively. The precisely calculated falling trajectories did not give the Gurkha rifles any time to react. 2 of the grenades thrown by Li Bang even exploded in the air. Boom! The gusts of air generated by the explosion directly blew up the 2 mercenaries who were still hanging in the air, and then they fell heavily onto the deck. Standard English voices rang out from a distance, and Chen Chen could vaguely make out that they were calling for cover and support. Cover me! Grenade! Grenade! Helicopter cover! Accompanied by continuous shouting, the door-mounted machine gun on the Super Lynx changed direction and began suppressing fire on the surroundings. This also made the Dongfeng Corps' demolitionists lose the opportunity to continue throwing grenades. Under the pressure of large-caliber machine guns, everyone could only retreat into the bunker and quietly wait for an opportunity. The situation is extremely critical. When the enemy has air superiority and we have no means of counterattack, the Dongfeng Corps will be in a very difficult situation. But Chen Chen knew that this difficulty was only temporary. Because no matter from which angle you look at it, the super links used by this Gurkha mercenary team cannot be refueled in the air. They must evacuate quickly after completing the personnel delivery and find a suitable place to land. This is why they would hastily carry out the rappelling without fully understanding the situation. Because they really don't have time. 5 minutes. 5 minutes at most, and the helicopter will evacuate. Everyone stay hidden and hold them back. Clear. Chen Chen received another reply on the radio. At the rappelling point, although 4 grenades caused casualties among 3 people, there were still 17 Gurkha mercenaries who had landed on the deck, quickly deployed, and began to advance. Buck, retreat! Chen Chen shouted loudly, and Buck, who received the news, immediately threw a smoke bomb and headed towards the bow where Chen Chen was. Fortunately, because the cargo on the ship was too messy, the vision of the Gurkha mercenaries who had just landed was blocked. Buck successfully evacuated to the second hiding point, avoiding the firepower of the Gurkha mercenaries who were searching. Smoke bombs were thrown one after another, and each advance was accompanied by the explosion of 1 or 2 stun grenades. The mercenaries were very fast. It took them less than half a minute to reach the captain's room, a distance of nearly 50 meters. Through the gaps in the cargo, Chen Chen clearly saw them enter the captain's room and begin to ask the crew about the situation. And it was obvious that their communication was not smooth. But their goal was to rescue the hostages, and now, the hostages were right in front of them. Chen Chen even considered revealing his identity to them. After all, there were no contradictions or direct conflicts between the two sides. Wouldn't it be better to treat this mission as a misunderstanding? If they needed it, Chen Chen could even give them the credit for killing the JD elements. But unfortunately, the other party had obviously obtained detailed intelligence. After a brief silence, a middle-aged man's voice suddenly appeared on the radio at the bow. Put down your weapons. You are surrounded. Immediately stop all JD activities and surrender immediately. Chen Chen was stunned. Are you kidding me? Am I a JD member? As soon as these words were spoken, Chen Chen knew that there was no room for mediation between the two parties. Either you beat me to death, or I beat you to death. History is written by the victors, and this truth also applies to the Dongfeng Corps. There is no doubt that the Gurkha Corps witnessed the Dongfeng Corps firing at the lifeboat. If the Dongfeng Corps was wiped out here, then no matter what they said, the Dongfeng Corps would not be able to refute it. Only by surviving can you get rid of the identity of a JD element. In order to survive, they have to kill all the Gurkha mercenaries on the ship. At this time, the sound of the helicopter had gradually faded away. Chen Chen waited cautiously for 2 minutes, constantly using stun grenades, and smoke bombs to block the Gurkhas from continuing their search. He was testing whether the enemy would make a feint and launch a counterattack, wiping out the Dongfeng Corps at the most intense moment of the battle. But it was obvious that the other party did not know that the Dongfeng Corps had guessed their identities, so they did not know that the Dongfeng Corps had already grasped the information that the helicopter was running low on fuel. They flew straight to their target, and Chen Chen immediately ordered, "Prepare for battle. We have at least an hour. They need to refuel." Group 1 continues to lurk and occupy the commanding heights. Team 2 uses projectiles to block the opponent's attack and control the main road. Group 3 Follow me and try to counterattack from the flank channel. Clear. The order was given, and everyone started moving. Looking from the sky, one by one black figures were passing through the gaps and rushing to their designated combat positions. At the front of the cargo ship, the first round of gunfight broke out in an extremely narrow aisle, with heavy assaulters from both sides all at the front. Li Bang exchanged 2 bullets with the opponent, but the power of the armor-piercing bullets was obviously higher than the ordinary bullets used by the opponent. When Li Bang was still able to stand and continue firing, the opponent's assaulter had already fallen back and retreated behind the cover. AP! AP! Chen Chen heard the Gurkha team members on the opposite side shouting, and then a stun grenade was thrown into the aisle. Li Bang, who was about to occupy the aisle and establish crossfire, was forced back. The Dongfeng Corps and the Gurkhas were in a brief standoff, but everyone knew that this standoff would soon be broken and a life-and-death battle was about to break out. In fact, the terrain on the deck of the Bangao cargo ship was quite complex. If Chen Chen were to describe it, he would directly use the transport ship map of a certain game as an example. The scattered small containers and bulk cargo piles divide the hundreds of square meters of the site into small pieces, and the activity area of each small piece may be as small as a few square meters. But even within this few square meters of space, there are nearly 10 armed gunmen crowded together. If it were a head-on attack without any strategy, the rate of casualties on both sides would be pulled to an astonishing level. But Chen Chen obviously did not intend to exchange his life with the opponent, so the strategy he chose was very simple. 2 groups threw objects to control the field, 3 groups harassed and interrupted, buying time for 1 group to control the commanding heights. Through the gap between the containers, Chen Chen saw a group of Gurkha team members, but he did not shoot. That it was not that he could not shoot, but that it was impossible to hit. Shooting in the gap was like throwing a stick through the security window of a house. You only get a probability, but this probability may expose your position and lose the advantage you have worked so hard to build. An enemy group is moving north, and 2 groups are throwing stun grenades to the north to intercept them. Clear. 2 seconds later, Chen Chen raised his head and saw a stun grenade flying over his head and landing in another corner that he could not see. Bang! A sharp explosion sounded, and Chen Chen left Yang Shu on the spot to guard, then quickly retreated with his short legs to bypass the container beside him, then walked east along the aisle and turned it to a zigzag path on the north side of the main road. Less than 10 meters in front of him was a corner consisting of 2 containers. Chen Chen hesitated for a moment, took off the tactical flashlight from his waist, turned on the light, and threw it out. After a perfect collision, the flashlight fell just outside the corner, and its light was projected onto the container 10 meters away in front of Chen. Watch out for shadows, shoot through walls. He spoke simply, and the short man behind him nodded immediately. This was the simplest reconnaissance device, and Chen Chen did not expect it to be very effective. But soon, the other party stepped into this reconnaissance trap. The light on the container was blocked by the shadow for a moment, and without Chen Chen saying anything, the short leg behind him immediately pulled the trigger. The M240 fired at full speed, and the bullets penetrated the 2 layers of the container side panels like a rainstorm, continuing to pass through at an inclined angle, completely covering the Gurkha squad that had just reached the corner. The other side was also wearing level 4 bulletproof vests, and the bullets that weakened in power after penetrating the container could not cause substantial damage to them. But this round of attacks had an amazing deterrent effect. They were completely stunned on the spot, shouting retreat while fighting back. This is the opportunity Chen Chen was waiting for. In VBSS combat, including CQB combat, the most important thing is to move forward courageously. The role of protection is very important, but any protection is to give you that first-line advantage in the attack. If you use this first-line advantage to retreat, it may mean that you will lose your only chance of survival. At this time, the angle of the short-legged firing is biased to the left of the direction it is facing, which just creates a narrow passage. Chen Chen took a few quick steps along the right passage, then reached for the stun grenade and prepared to throw it around the corner. It's not that he doesn't want to use grenades, but because, in the current extremely narrow close-range assault, you have no way of ensuring that the grenade will land in the correct spot. It would be fun if it got blocked by some obstacle and rolled back to him. In fact, in most battles in tortuous and narrow terrains, grenades are not the first choice. Even in CQB, grenades are only used when breaking down doors to clear them. In comparison, stun grenades have a better effect. But at this moment, a stun grenade thrown from the corner hit him directly in the face. Chen Chen's heart sank suddenly. At this distance, in a semi-enclosed space, the lethality of stun grenades has basically reached its limit. Turn around to avoid harm? Stop talking nonsense. This kind of action is not only useful in CSGO. He had very little time to react because the fuse length of the stun grenade was basically controlled within 3 seconds. Almost subconsciously, Chen Chen took a big step forward and fired the stun grenade in his hand at the same time. Then he opened his eyes wide and captured the position of the enemy in front of him. The other party was wearing masks and goggles, so Chen Chen couldn't see their expressions clearly. But judging from their actions, they were obviously in a panic. The picture seemed to be frozen, and Chen Chen closed his eyes. He raised his elbows and pressed them on his goggles in a triangle shape. This was the only way to reduce the amount of flash penetration to a certain extent. At the same time, the 416 Hong Kong dollars in the right hand had already opened fire. In full auto mode, the gunshot lasted only 1 second. It wasn't that they ran out of bullets, but that stun grenades exploded. Under the huge noise, all external sounds were completely suppressed. Chen Chen was so dizzy that he slammed heavily on the container behind him. He had lost his visual and auditory senses. The only thing that could judge his condition was the recoil on his right shoulder from the continuous shooting of the gun that a few seconds later. Chen Chen came to his senses and found that he had actually returned to the passage. The direction he had shot just now was just the container that was within reach. Without any hesitation, Chen Chen pulled out a grenade from his waist. Now he had ample opportunity to use dangerous explosives. He leaned over and threw a grenade at the container in front of him, then quickly fell backwards. After bouncing once, the grenade fell into the aisle behind the corner ahead. Boom! advertisement and explosion sounded, and Chen Chen stumbled to his feet. His head was dizzy and his legs were weak, which were the after effects of the stun grenade. It was even impossible for him to aim in this situation because all he could see were shadows. But this doesn't matter, because the three-man team that had just entered the corridor were all killed by his grenade. Control the intersection. Chen Chen shouted loudly. The short man behind him quickly followed up, and after taking over Chen Chen's control of the corner, Chen Chen was finally able to return to the safe area to rest. The dizzy feeling gradually passed, and at this moment, the report of Group 1 came from his headphones. The enemy has taken control of the commanding heights. They are located in the stern cabin. 1 sniper and 2 machine gunners. The angle is bad, and we can't fight back. We have been suppressed. The situation changed rapidly and unpredictably. Just as Chen Chen's Group 3 defeated a Gurkha squad and established a local advantage, Group 1's search for a commanding height was completely interrupted. This was actually a risk that Chen Chen had been prepared to take. After all, they couldn't engage in a head-on confrontation with the enemy near the cockpit because the Gurkhas had the air advantage of 2 helicopters at the time. The longer we stay in the open, the greater our casualties will be. Under desperate circumstances, we can only abandon the high ground. But once you give up, how to get it back becomes a big problem. Although it was impossible to obtain a complete view directly above from the cab, the Dongfeng Corps immediately fell into a passive position under the continuous fire suppression. Chen Chen originally wanted to continue breaking through and clearing the rear, but as soon as he showed his head, the machine gun fire from the cab came down fiercely. If the short man hadn't suddenly pulled him from behind, he would have been unable to stop the car and would have been completely exposed to the hail of bullets. We must destroy the firing point. Bazooka! Just use the bazooka! Chen Chen shouted loudly. This time they brought RPGs, 2 RPGs previously seized from MPRI. Chen Chen's original intention was to use it in a possible pursuit battle, but now, he couldn't care less. There's a crew in the wheelhouse. Sure, Dakai interrupted Chen Chen and continued. We need to tell them to evacuate first and have Ping Chuan connect to the Bangao's radio. Can. Chen Chen gave the order decisively. In just over 10 seconds, Ping Chuan established contact with the cab and explained the Dongfeng Corps' intentions. But a scene that made Chen Chen dumbfounded happened. The crew members who wanted to leave the cab were stopped at the door by the Gurkha mercenaries and forced back into the cab at gunpoint. Good job. Who was the JD member? The situation became extremely tense. The team members who had loaded the RPG hid behind the bunker. As long as Chen Chen opened his mouth, they would launch rockets into the cab under machine gun fire. However, this decision is not so easy to make. After all, the Dongfeng Corps is no longer in Pubei. They were on an international cargo ship, facing well-known international mercenaries under the jurisdiction of the regular army. If they didn't do it cleanly this time, if they were caught, hit the mast, hit the mast. Buck yelled over the radio. Chen Chen gritted his teeth and finally made a decision. Fuck the mast. Grass. The first round hit the cabin below the control platform, and the second round hit the driving cabin directly. I don't believe those crew members won't run away, and I don't believe the Gurkhas really dare to shoot to stop them. If they really dare to stop us, we'll blow them all up. Buck was stunned when he finished speaking. He suddenly realized that in terms of actual psychological warfare, he was still far behind the man named Chen Chen. Yes, how could the Gurkha really dare to stop him? If they really stopped him, who would be to blame? Before he could even wrap his mind around this, the RPG in Li Bang's hand had already gone off. One bullet hit the lower part of the bridge accurately. A loud explosion sounded, and everyone on the ship was stunned for a second. Afterwards, gunshots continued, but the cab was in chaos. The crew members ran out of the cab desperately and ran to the crew cabin behind the cab. Chen Chen didn't care about that. 20 seconds later, he gave the order to open fire again. And this time, the rocket hit the cab accurately. Explosions rang out again, and the Gurkha's high position was completely destroyed. Then, Chen Chen ordered, seize the high ground on the forecastle. Gain advantage. Keep them off the front deck and don't let them get the cover advantage. Clear. Everyone answered in turn, and a fierce counterattack broke out instantly. This was a unique opportunity. The Gurkha's confidence had been severely hit by the 2 explosions, and the Dongfeng Corps concentrated all its projectiles and launched a counterattack in the narrow terrain. The advantage of terrain was fully utilized at this moment, and the Gurkhas located on the open rear deck could not find enough cover. But when Chen Chen led 3 groups of members to break out of the siege from the flank and set up machine gun fire points, the battle had actually come to an end. At this moment, on an aircraft carrier more than 100 kilometers away, ground crew members were refueling 2 helicopters at the fastest speed. Speed up! Speed up! That ship is about to sink. We have to rush back as soon as possible to pick up our guys. Understood, sir? Don't worry. Those Gurkhas are very smart. They will seize the enemy's lifeboat. A few minutes later, the helicopter was refueled. The Super Lynx took off again, but at this moment they didn't know that most of the people they wanted to pick up no longer existed. The Gurkhas made almost all the mistakes that could be made in the VBSS operation, and in contrast, the Dongfeng Corps avoided almost all the mistakes in the anti-VBSS operation. First of all, in terms of terrain selection, the Dongfeng Corps seized the complex terrain and avoided being trapped in the cabin and sinking with the cargo ship, while the Gurkhas followed their training manual and carried out the process of airdropping near the stern step by step. Although they did gain certain advantages in the early stage, they invisibly downgraded their biggest task. That's right, they are not here to rescue people. After seeing their key men slaughtered, their mission has shifted from rescue to cleanup. They must ensure that all members of the Dongfeng Corps are killed in order to save the remaining innocent passengers on the ship, and at the same time completely cut off the chain of evidence of the US's connection with ISK. However, the mission changed, but their consciousness did not change with it. Their actions were too conservative and their attacks were too reckless, or in other words, they were too confident. They were even so confident that they felt they didn't need the cover of helicopters, and could completely crush the Dongfeng Corps with these 20 people. Of course, in fact, they did fight evenly matched, or even slightly advantageous. But as the control panel was blown up by an RPG, the entire battlefield changed drastically in an instant. Chen Chen led the team to establish a supporting firepower point in the middle of the deck. Relying on the heavy plate cargo around it, the Dongfeng Corps built a simple barricade, completely blocking the entire area from the middle of the deck to the tail. At the same time, Shirdakai had led his team to occupy the forecastle. Two snipers fired continuously to suppress the Gurkha mercenaries retreating to the stern. The large-caliber 12.7mm ammunition became the decisive force in this battle. After more than 4 people were killed, the Gurkha mercenaries' formation became completely disorganized. Chen Chen keenly sensed this opportunity, so he immediately ordered. The remaining 12 enemies are on the left side of the poop, the middle of the deck, and the rear of the deck. Group 3, follow me and press forward. Group 1, help me clear the passage. Group 2, throw objects to cover and follow up from the left. Divide the battlefield. Clear out the enemy squad in the middle of the deck first. Clear. In an instant, the 11 members of the Dongfeng Corps pounced out like a tiger leaping into the woods. Under the cover of advanced night vision equipment, the team achieved a strong balance between agility and accuracy. For the first time, Chen Chen felt that this night vision equipment, which he didn't think much of, could also play a huge role in specific environments. Machine gun fire at the stern. Sniper. There is an enemy machine gunner behind the second-floor bunker of the bridge at 14 o'clock. Group 3. Cover the short men. Move forward to the bottom of the bridge and establish a fire support point. Alternate cover leap. Chen Chen kept issuing orders one after another, and the mercenaries of the Gurkha rifles fell one after another. It has to be said that the fighting spirit of this team was actually very strong. Even though their men had been reduced by nearly half and they had not been able to cause any effective damage to the Dongfeng Corps, their team had not collapsed. They even successfully established a new counterattack position after launching a wave of blocking attacks relying on the stern tower. But it was all in vain. In the case of a light weapons confrontation, whoever has more projectiles will have a greater advantage. As for the Dongfeng Corps, with no way to obtain more heavy weapons, almost every one of them pulled the maximum of throwing objects. After another round of stun grenades, the Gurkha's secondary defense line completely collapsed, the bridge tower was completely lost, and the Dongfeng Corps occupied the cab that was originally used as a firing point by the Gurkha. In fact, the front wheelhouse was completely destroyed, but the radio room on the left rear side of the wheelhouse survived. The ship's entire broadcasting system was set up here. Lu Siyuan, who occupied the radio room, immediately used English to persuade the Gurkha mercenaries to surrender and directly stated his identity as an SMP. But his persuasion to surrender did not have the desired effect. By this time, the remaining mercenaries had made contact with their Lynx helicopter and reported the tragic battle situation on the Bangao. They tried to delay time, trying to regain their advantage and victory after the helicopter arrived. The two sides were once again in a stalemate, and this time, the offense and defense had switched positions. The time to attack is now. We must defeat them in one fell swoop. Buck noticed the change in the situation and spoke very quickly. We have been fighting for nearly an hour, and the enemy's reinforcements will arrive soon. We are running out of time. We must solve the problem as soon as possible. Give it a try. Even if there are casualties, we can't defeat them. The enemy has occupied the stern cabin. Chen Chen interrupted Buck without hesitation and continued. If we continue to attack, it will become us going to fight VBSS. This exchange of casualties is meaningless. Do we have to make it a turn-based game? What should we do then? What else can we do? Retreat. Immediately broadcast to the entire ship and ask the crew to evacuate to the middle of the deck. While the ship is not sinking quickly and there are no low-pressure vortices around it, have them put on their life jackets and jump into the sea to escape. Advertisement, such a calm sea. No one can drown. We deploy all the remaining bombs onto the hull and detonate them after the crew has evacuated. Buck was stunned again. After a few seconds of silence, he finally spoke. I understand you want to hold the helicopter. That's right. Chen Chen didn't have time to explain too much, and a series of strategies were immediately implemented. While Group 3 continued to suppress the stern, Group 1 and Group 2 had completed the evacuation along the ladder. At this time, it had been exactly 1 hour since they had blew up the Bangao, and the tilt angle of the ship was less than 5 degrees, so their actions were not greatly affected. But the balance of the ship has actually reached the brink of collapse. As long as it crosses that line, its sinking speed will immediately accelerate. And Chen Chen planned to give it a push. 3 minutes later, the first rubber boat was full of people, and Group 3 was still continuing to suppress the enemy. In the absence of high-altitude vision, this was a risk they had to take. Alternate cover, hellfire tactics, jump from the bow, and evacuate. Throw all the smoke bombs and grenades to suppress the enemy's firepower. Shorty, you retreat to the forecastle first and establish a firepower support point. Even as a precision shooter, Chen Chen was performing his duties with great professionalism. His field was back to being hot, and at a distance of several dozen meters, his crosshairs were a spell of death. With just in 416 Hong Kong dollars, he was able to achieve absolute suppression. Within a dozen seconds of running, Yang Shu and Chen Chen fired alternately, killing the two enemies who tried to intercept them directly on the deck. Then, the M240 in the short man's hand sounded, and Chen Chen quickly ran to the forecastle to set up a firing point. Under his cover, Yang Shu also evacuated to the forecastle, and behind them was the bottomless sea. The boat is going very slowly. Dive to both sides and quickly get out of the low-pressure area. Chen Chen shouted loudly. Then, the three of them jumped into the water one after another. The arriving rubber boat quickly picked up the 3 people in the water, and the 2 RPGs on the rubber boat opened fire instantly. Immediately afterwards, the C4 placed by the team members who evacuated early also exploded. Flames rose from the stern deck, and the Gurkha soldiers on it looked a little helpless. At the bow, the crew of the Bangao had already jumped into the water one by one to escape, just like Chen Chen. 30 seconds later, the arriving transport boat took over the rubber boat to suppress the deck of the Bangao. The 12.7mm large-caliber machine guns blocked all of the enemy's evacuation routes. The rubber boats were abandoned, and the transport boats sped up to escape towards the coast. At this time, The roar of helicopters could be heard in the air. In the darkness of the night, Chen Chen was completely unable to capture its location. But it doesn't matter anymore. Chen Chen had already called Xiaoyu through Pingchuan, and the Indonesian military had received new instructions. Just as the helicopter arrived over the transport ship, two significant targets traveling at high speed appeared on the helicopter's radar. The two bobcats were caught in a dilemma. Either take a gamble and kill the transport boat first, and then be killed by the fighter jets. Or turn around and rescue their team members trapped on the dhow. In fact, this choice is not difficult. After circling the transport ship for 2 weeks, the helicopter had no choice but to leave. Chen Chen stood at the bow of the transport ship, spitting at the burning light of the dhow in the distance, raised his middle finger, and cursed in a low voice. Fuck you. Are you kidding me? They ended the battle and evacuated before the helicopter returned. How is this possible? From the completion of the delivery to the refueling, and then back, it only took an hour in total. No matter how strong the Dongfeng Corps is, it's impossible for them to completely wipe out the Gurkhas in just 1 hour, right? In the command room of the aircraft carrier's bridge, the editor pointed to the man who was staring at him in amazement and asked in disbelief. The man on the other side shook his head helplessly and replied, "They didn't completely wipe out the Gurkhas. No one has the ability to completely eliminate the Gurkhas in such a short time and in such a complex combat environment. They only blocked the first round of Gurkhas' attack, launched a counterattack, and suppressed the Gurkhas who were boarding the ship. And then they blew the boat completely out of the water. They used all the explosives they could find and blew off nearly the entire starboard side of the Banao." At this point, the man paused, then continued. In short, their strategy is very elementary, but also very useful. The returning super links must quickly rescue the Gurkha regiment. Even a second of delay may result in the loss of one more life. Plus, the Dongfeng Corps has reached an agreement with Indonesia. Agreement? How is that possible? The editor subconsciously interrupted the man, then coughed and asked, I mean, they are just a mercenary group. Why do they have any connection with the Indonesian government? Friend, have you really read the intelligence carefully? The man looked at the weaving finger helplessly and said, I haven't read much, but I have a general understanding of the background of the Dongfeng Corps. What I don't understand is, even with their background, it's impossible to mobilize the military to escort them, right? This is an extremely risky mission. How could the authorities support them? Hearing what the editor said, the man sighed deeply. Then he began to explain. The Dongfeng Corps is not just the black gloves of the North. They are also the black gloves of Indonesia, okay? You think they just got involved in the fight with MPRI by accident? No, they planned it for a long time. They have already confirmed the identity of the SMP. To be precise, they are a group of mercenaries in the hands of the Indonesian police. And you don't want to tell me that you don't even know what happened to the police and the military recently? I know. The editor breathed a sigh of relief and continued. I just didn't expect that they could convince the military to stand up for them. Do they need convincing? The man chuckled and said, 24 ISK members were wiped out in a matter of seconds, and the Gurkha mercenaries who came to reinforce were beaten so badly that they had no chance to fight back. Who would you help at this time? That I'll help whoever wins. Who will win then? Anyway, it's definitely not the Gurkhas who can win. That's it? Then who are you helping? I won't help the Gurkhas anyway. You have thought it through clearly. The man nodded with satisfaction. At this moment, the superior-subordinate relationship between the two parties seemed to have been reversed. The editor at the side couldn't help but shook his head, feeling a complicated feeling in his heart. However, as the commander of this huge fleet, he himself was actually very clear that in terms of conspiracy and intrigue, he was indeed not as good as the commander-in-chief of the carrier-based aircraft wing. Maybe everyone's responsibilities are naturally different. Thinking of this, he said, it's meaningless to discuss this now. The real problem we face is how to explain this to the British side. We gave them wrong intelligence, which led to heavy losses for the Gurkha regiment. From any perspective, we must give an explanation to the British side. This may not be easy to handle. What's the problem? The man opposite shook his head indifferently and then said, it's not our people who died. Everyone will be grateful for the decision we made. The Pentagon will thank us for saving their guys, the CIA will thank us for preventing further exposure, and even the British will thank us for giving them this opportunity. So, let it be. We have done what we were supposed to do. Next, someone will take the initiative to finish this matter. At the same time, at the port of Manado, the Dongfeng Corps, which had just fought a great battle, had returned to the shore. Without any hesitation, Chen Chen immediately led the team to the airport. After abandoning a large amount of equipment that might be used as evidence, he flew back to La Bota as quickly as possible. It has to be said that their action this time was a huge success. Not only did they use the simplest strategy and the highest efficiency to completely destroy the remaining forces of ISK in Indonesia, but they also used the Gurkha Corps as a whetstone to once again verify the strength of the Dongfeng Corps. According to post-war review, in a VBSS operation, at least 12 of the 20 Gurkha regiment members deployed on the cargo ship Bangau suffered casualties, and at least 8 of them were directly killed. What does this mean? Admittedly, the combat effectiveness of the Gurkha rifles is much weaker than the standardized special forces of various countries in the world, but due to the British investment in Syria this year, this team has been greatly improved in terms of equipment level, training level, and combat maturity. Even if it is not as good as the Sea Leopard, it is at least on the same level as the SAS. Although the beating given by the Dongfeng Corps could not be said to be the same as an adult beating a child, it was basically not much different. There was no other way. Although the Gurkha rifles had also been tempered by blood and fire, those old soldiers who had seen blood had long since retired or entered the command or administrative sequence. The current Gurkha rifles had only theoretical knowledge, but were completely unable to exert their strongest strength. In contrast, the Dongfeng Corps has almost no systematic training so far. Their combat effectiveness is the result of serious fighting in battle after battle. Although they're all killing techniques, there are differences between killing techniques and killing techniques. To put it more intuitively, the battle losses of the Dongfeng Corps are the best proof of their great victory. A total of 4 people were injured, all with minor injuries. One of them was hit in the left arm by grenade fragments and was unable to move, but after emergency treatment, his prognosis is good. Both men were hit in the torso by snipers, but under the protection of the 4th-level bulletproof plates, the power of the bullets had been greatly weakened, and no internal organs were damaged at all. After the bullets were removed, the recovery period would be very short. The last one is Li Bang. In a way, he was the least injured but also the most difficult to deal with. He paid the price for his recklessness. Facing the Gurkha rifle regiment that continuously used stun grenades, his strategy of attacking by stepping on stun grenades failed. Although he did make a breakthrough, the eardrum was repeatedly subjected to the impact of sound pressure and had already suffered serious damage. Advertisement since arriving in Manado, his hearing has always been at the level of barely being able to hear loud shouts. Even Ping Chuan was helpless in this regard. He could only wait until everything was over and then take him to a large hospital in Jakarta for rehabilitation treatment. Fortunately, this kind of damage is not permanent. As long as you have enough time and take care of it slowly, your hearing will recover sooner or later. On the plane, Chen Chen gave Li Bang a severe scolding. He thought he had spoken very loudly, but in fact the latter could hardly hear a few words he said. In addition, the plane itself was very noisy, and the two of them were almost talking at cross purposes. Don't act rashly in the future. Offense is important, but we also need to take defense into consideration and play steadily. What? Take over the blockade and surround and attack? What does that mean? That don't be reckless in a fight. War doesn't require brains? Yes, I think that's right. Fuck you. Look at Bao Qi. Trigger pulled all the way? I told you not to step on the stun grenade. I know this. Don't step on the stun grenade. Chen Chen finally gave up communicating with Li Bang, but he vaguely realized that Li Bang's reckless nature didn't need to be changed. The flight from Manado to La Boda only took more than an hour, and the group quickly entered the Qingshan Park. Those who needed treatment received treatment, and those who needed to rest rested. Chen Chen himself returned to the office and immediately called Xiaoyu. All that needs to be done has been done, and now it is time to reap the rewards. What? What money did Xiaoyu give? That was nothing, it was just a deposit at best. Chen Chen paid such a huge price and handed over such an important letter of allegiance. What he wanted was not just a sum of money. The call was connected quickly, and Xiaoyu's slightly tired voice came from the receiver. She did not give Chen Chen a chance to speak first. Instead, she quickly confirmed the situation of Chen Chen and the Dongfeng Corps before beginning to introduce the latest intelligence to Chen Chen. Contrary to Chen Chen's expectations, the impact of this incident was not as great as he thought. The loss of the Gurkha rifles is a significant loss for the British, but the regiment itself is a mercenary regiment, and overall its political significance has been severely weakened. Secondly, according to intelligence, the Gurkha rifles action this time was assigned by the US, and their helicopters even carried out resupply on a US aircraft carrier. What kind of concept is this? Cross-deck helicopter landings, or simply cross-deck, is a very sensitive operation. They must have done it privately before, but they definitely can't bring it up in public. So, both sides are consciously covering up this issue, and they prefer to pretend that it didn't happen. But of course, their revenge against you is another matter. But you don't really care, do you? Next, you will return to Pubei to deal with the issues of core construction and equipment acceptance. There, your security will be greatly improved. Anyway, the Gurkha rifles affairs have nothing to do with you for now. Temporary? Chen Chen subconsciously interrupted Xiaoyu and asked, "What do you mean temporarily?" Xiaoyu on the other end of the phone smiled helplessly and said, "Temporarily means that I can't guarantee that there will be no problem 100%, but I promise to do my best to solve all the problems for you. Is this clear enough?" "That's clear enough." Chen Chen breathed a sigh of relief and continued, "You told me that once this matter is over, all our operations in Indonesia will basically come to an end. Now can you tell me what we got?" "The trade route from Indochina to Indonesia, the right to operate the Indonesian market, the right to use the port of Manado, and the right to be protected at the Sulawesi base. And of course, the strong ties you have with the Indonesian authorities. These things are very valuable. We can even say that they are beyond the scope of valuable, right?" "Really?" Chen Chen had no way of refutation at all to Xiaoyu's words. Of course, in fact, he didn't need to refute at all. None of the gains and conditions mentioned by the other party are linked to definite benefits. It is more of a complex of multiple licenses. But Chen Chen knew what all these permissions meant to him. This means that Indonesia will become Dongfeng Group's largest freight distribution center. Starting from this country, with thousands of islands, Dongfeng Group can reach any corner of the world. Such conditions are basically equivalent to taking care of a country. That's right, it is impossible for the North to directly endorse the Dongfeng Corps, nor is it possible for the North to really let the Dongfeng Corps act as a thug or black glove. But there is no problem in being the black glove of your subordinates. Thinking of this, Chen Chen let out a long sigh and said, "Since you said so, I will show my strength. Next month, I plan to import a batch of goods to sell in Indonesia. By then, I hope these convenient conditions can still take effect conveniently." "Absolutely," Xiaoyu answered solemnly. So, Chen Chen nodded slightly, and then asked, "Next question. What do we get?" The way he asked the question was very obscure, but this did not hinder the communication between the two people who already had a tacit understanding. The little fish was silent for a few seconds and replied, "A lot of, but there are three most important ones. First, we have stabilized the situation in Sulawesi, established Sulawesi's position as an industrial frontier, helped certain actions gain leverage, and are moving towards victory. Secondly, we have taken over the port of Palapali and completely cut off the connection between the Celebes Sea and the east and west sides. Especially after the Gurkhas are defeated, this sea will once again become the high seas, the real high seas. Third, the president is in power. I don't need to say more about this, right?" "No." Chen Chen nodded in understanding. From Xiaoyu's few words, he could already tell that this time, the benefits Xiaoyu would gain would definitely be unimaginably huge, a win-win situation. No, a win-win situation for all. "That's it. I'll be back to Pubei soon. From February to March, I will basically stay in Pubei. If there is further cooperation, you can find me, but I have a mission now. Xiaoyu interrupted Chen Chen suddenly, and without waiting for Chen Chen to answer, she asked directly, "Are you willing to go to Syria?" Syria? After hearing Xiaoyu's request, Chen Chen's first reaction was to evacuate the Chinese people. But in fact, in Chen Chen's memory, it was Libya, not Syria, that actually carried out the evacuation of overseas Chinese. The situations in these two countries are fundamentally different. Compared with the large-scale riots, conflicts, and casualties in Libya in early 2011, the Syrian civil war led by the Arab Spring was relatively mild. From the official outbreak in March until December of that year, it was still in a calm period. Demonstrations and protests were the main theme of this civil war in the early stages, and armed conflicts were not common. Under such circumstances, Xiaoyu's invitation to Chen Chen, or rather, the invitation to the Dongfeng Corps to go to Syria, really made Chen Chen a little confused. Therefore, the moment he heard her question, Chen Chen immediately asked back, "What are you going to Syria for?" "There will be a similar escort mission to the one at Qingshan Park, but I promise this mission will be much simpler. You can even send a small team and an interpreter to explore the way first. If they had executed it well, you wouldn't have to go." Since Xiaoyu dared to say this, Chen Chen really had nothing to refuse. What he was most worried about was that his team had just escaped from a high-intensity, high-complexity battle, and in the blink of an eye, they had to get involved in another high-intensity mission. That would not only be detrimental to recovery, but also detrimental to the Dongfeng Corps' proper digestion of the current results and realization of truly sustainable development. However, since Xiaoyu said that I don't have to go for the time being, it means that the complexity of this task is indeed relatively low, and it may be just a regular order. Send me a detailed mission brief, preferably with a contract. I'll give you a reply after I confirm that there is no problem. Can. Xiaoyu answered decisively, and after chatting for a few more sentences, Chen Chen hung up the phone directly. The mission about Syria was actually just a bonus, and he had already learned all the information he wanted to know. Through Xiaoyu's feedback, he realized that the situation in Indonesia was really coming to an end. Next, I just need to arrange a series of affairs for normal operations, and then return to Pubei as soon as possible to finish the unfinished tasks. Walking out of the office, Chen Chen ran into Buck, who was looking for him. The latter had a complex joy on his face. Chen Chen looked at him suspiciously and asked, "What's wrong? Do you want to talk to me about something?" Buck nodded slightly and replied, "There is something. Shall we go to your office to talk?" Chen Chen had no choice but to return to the office. As soon as he entered the door, Buck couldn't wait to say, "Some things have changed. The military extended an olive branch to me. They invited me to rejoin the Navy and continue to serve as a VBSS Special Operations instructor. The conditions are very generous, even overly generous. Do you think I should accept their invitation?" Hearing his words, Chen Chen shook his head helplessly and replied, "If you really intended to accept the invitation from the military, then you wouldn't have come here to ask for my opinion, right? You know clearly that this show of goodwill is risky, but it's hard for you to convince yourself to give up this opportunity. So you want me to help you make the decision. And my decision is not to go." "That's so decisive?" Buck didn't seem surprised by Chen Chen's answer, but he still subconsciously asked another question. "Nonsense, you have already paid enough tribute, and even directly mobilized the military forces in this mission. Although you are not the core of this mission, everyone can see your close connection with this mission. In other words, joining a certain faction is definitely not the best choice for you right now. Your destiny, as I said, is still that of a broker. Only in this way can you maximize your advantages and achieve a win-win result. The path is clear, and we have even agreed on it. You hesitate only because the opportunity the military offers you is more secure. But I hope you can understand one thing clearly. That is, the only reason why you are still standing in front of me now is that you took the initiative to find me." Chen Chen's tone became serious, and a barely perceptible coldness flashed in his eyes. Buck looked at his expression, was stunned for a few seconds, and suddenly nodded in understanding. That's right, the opportunity he had was given by the Dongfeng Corps and Chen Chen. In this VBSS battle, I did play a certain role, but honestly, if it weren't for me, would they really be unable to fight? That's not necessarily true, right? Although it seemed like an exchange of interests and a mutually beneficial thing, in reality, he was still taking advantage of the Dongfeng Corps and walking on the path they had paved for him. That means that you shouldn't be ungrateful. You wavered as soon as the military offered an olive branch, and even wanted to run a new election? Are things in this world that simple? Today was the military, what about tomorrow? What if the other party was not the friendly army of the Dongfeng Corps but the enemy? Do you have to choose again? Fortunately, my intention was very clear. Fortunately, I had no intention of leaving. It was just like what Chen Chen said, I just needed a sense of identity. If it was someone else, and he really wanted to change his appearance, would Chen Chen let him go? Buck couldn't help but sit up straight. At this moment, he finally felt the oppression from the god of war in front of him. Although it was just a simple sentence, it was enough to reveal his majesty that no one could question. "I see." Buck spoke immediately, and then explained, "That's not what I meant. I meant that if you have a better form of cooperation, we can try it." "No need." Chen Chen interrupted Buck and continued, "Since you are here, let's settle the matter. Just like I said, you cannot join the Dongfeng Corps, and you will not exist as the Dongfeng Corps. But, in fact, you will have to handle a series of social affairs for us. So, I need you to register a company, Military Consulting Services. Advertisement, someone will contact you later to provide you with further guidance. If there is something you don't know, just ask. You should know what you're going to do, right?" "I know." Buck nodded without hesitation, and Chen Chen finally showed a satisfied smile on his face. He stood up and walked out of the office with Buck. At this moment, in the square in the middle of Qingshan Park, a group of people had just held a meeting using the equipment and venue of Qingshan Park, and were walking slowly around the square accompanied by guards. Chen Chen walked straight towards these people, and when they saw him, they greeted him with warm smiles. Chen Chen introduced Buck to them once again, emphasizing that he was a member of the 88th Task Force, had a good relationship with the police, and was an important partner of Dongfeng Group. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone understood what Chen Chen meant. Therefore, Buck became the protagonist of this encounter. In the atmosphere where he was the center of attention, he finally let down all his guard and blended into this complex social circle like a fish in water. Instead, Chen Chen left the crowd early. After a brief greeting, he handed the home court over to Buck. This is a step that must be taken. Even if it is black gloves, there must be rules for black gloves. The Dongfeng Corps is the black glove of a certain force, and Buck is the black glove of the Dongfeng Corps. The finishing work in Indonesia went quite smoothly. The possible revenge of the Gurkha Corps after the heavy losses that Chen Chen was worried about did not come at all. It has to be said that the Grading Empire is really bad. If they were still the former British Empire, would they let it go after suffering such a huge loss? The invincible fleet was about to hit the door of others. But now, they made only one most intense reaction. That is, to spread negative news about the Dongfeng Corps through the media, while questioning the rationality of the Dongfeng Corps' actions and the rationality of the mercenary group itself. In addition, they chose the same strategy as the previous MPRI and described the maritime conflict as a misunderstanding. They attributed their losses to the recklessness of the Dongfeng Corps. According to one of their spokespersons who was publicly interviewed, if you had laid down your weapons and surrendered on the spot, wouldn't we have avoided the losses? What does that mean? I just want to kill you. If you don't resist, wouldn't we have avoided the losses? This statement even made the Indonesian police unable to hold back because they realized that if they really let the British guys continue to make trouble, the matter would probably get bigger and bigger. After all, the British are not Americans, and their presence in East Asia is relatively low. There is no loss if you don't gain anything from making a fuss and fighting, but if there is an unexpected gain, it will be pure profit. Therefore, the Indonesian police, who originally planned to deal with this matter vaguely, stood up directly and declared the legitimacy of the action, and stated that this action was not the so-called meaningless battle between mercenary groups, but a heroic act of an SMP team on a mission was harassed by mercenaries from other countries, but finally resolutely completed the mission. Instead, they announced the target of the operation and the background of some JD elements. They claimed that the JD elements came from EM. There is no doubt that the Indonesian officials still want to save the last bit of face for the US and to retain the possibility of easing the situation for themselves. For a big country, such ambiguous stance is beyond reproach, and Chen Chen is quite satisfied with the way they handled it. At least they withstood the pressure from the British, allowing the Dongfeng Corps to avoid facing a more complicated situation. 2 weeks after the end of Operation Bangao, everything was settled. As a thug, Chen Chen didn't care much about how the political game behind the scenes was completed. He only knew that he was safe and the Eastern Corps was also safe. Therefore, after confirming that the situation in Sulawesi was stable, Chen Chen flew back to Jakarta with most of the team members, leaving only Lin Chinming and Lu Siyuan as local staff to continue to be responsible for the security tasks in the park and its surrounding areas. According to Chen Chen's plan, once the Dongfeng Corps team expands, these two people will have to assume part of the leadership responsibility to establish the Dongfeng Corps' second-line team. Sulawesi is a treasure land. Like the warlords in Pubay, the JD elements here are also cut and grown in batches, so it is perfect to use it as a training ground. Of course, this is something that needs to be considered later. Now for Chen Chen, there is actually only one most important thing he needs to do. Go see Bao Chi. Suchi Hospital was near the villa area where they lived. After settling the other team members, Chen Chen brought the veterans of the Dongfeng Corps to Suchi Hospital and met Bao Chi lying on the hospital bed. Bao Chi's condition was much better than Chen Chen had expected. His right hand had been reattached, but because the bones in his right shoulder were completely shattered, the effect of the surgery was very limited. If he really wants to restore the function of his arm, he must rebuild the muscles, bones, and nervous system, and at the same time ensure sufficient training to help the body adapt to the functional impairment of the arm. The current plan is to temporarily reconnect the nerves, maintain nerve activity, and attempt to perform initial recovery. But I don't know whether I can achieve autonomous activities in the future. Ping Chuan said while shaking his head, while checking Bao Chi's condition. Chen Chen nodded slightly and continued to ask, where can I get the bone and muscle reconstruction you mentioned? It can't be done anywhere. This is just a cutting-edge exploration plan. There is no laboratory. It is only in the papers. Where can it be done? Ping Chuan answered in a slightly unkind tone, and then continued. This is a very realistic situation. Although his arm has been replanted, this type of surgery is basically only for cosmetic purposes. The difficulty of follow-up care is unimaginable, and the prognosis is not good. Let's just amputate. At least we tried. Hearing this, Chen Chen's brows furrowed slightly. Is there nothing we can do in the north? Ping Chuan shook his head and replied, the limb replantation technology in the north is very advanced, but you have to know that all technology has its limits. It is precisely because even the north side can't do it that I suggest amputation. Bao Chi, what do you say? Bao Chi, who was lying on the bed, was very calm. He nodded and replied, amputate the limb and save the life first. I can't help it. It's just bad luck. I can't blame anyone. I guess I won't be able to carry a gun in my right hand anymore. But I'm not a rifleman anyway, am I? Looking at Bao Chi's expectant eyes, Chen Chen couldn't help but smile. He said, that's right. Some weapons don't require two hands. One hand, or even just one finger presses a button, and that's it. Bao Chi's arm was finally irreparable, and Chen Chen couldn't help but feel sorry for him. But fortunately, as he said, many things can be done with one hand. Dongfeng Group's business is constantly expanding. From a shabby gun regiment with only a few people and a few guns in the beginning, although there are less than 30 combat personnel now, the various comprehensive support personnel under the entire system have reached a scale of thousands of people. There are really so many things Bao Chi can do. Even if he was determined to stay on the front line, Chen Chen could still arrange a combat position suitable for him. If the gunner can't do it, the artilleryman can always do it. If the artilleryman can't do it, what if one day, Dongfeng really has Dongfeng? Bao Chi was originally going to move towards high-tech warfare with Ping Chuan. Although losing his right arm was a heavy loss, there was still some room for maneuver. However, no matter what, he was destined not to return to Pubay. The medical conditions there are not conducive to his recovery. and if any problems arise later, there is no way to deal with them in a timely manner. Of course, Chen Chen was also worried about leaving him in Jakarta. The wounded are always a loophole. Although Bao Qi's situation is completely confidential, the consequences of underestimating the CIA's intelligence reconnaissance capabilities have been verified by countless organizations and individuals with their lives. Therefore, Chen Chen decided to follow Xiaoyu's plan and send Bao Qi to HK. In this way, Bao Qi actually became the first member of the Dongfeng Corps to go to the north. If I have to say envy, it would seem a bit too exaggerated, but if you say I don't have any emotion at all, that would also be a lie. After all, one of the very important reasons why Chen Chen decided to become a mercenary was to return to the north. Now it seems that this goal can be achieved ahead of schedule. On the first day of February, the medical charter flight was arranged. Chen Chen personally sent Bao Qi on the plane and then watched the plane fly away. While waiting for the plane to land, they did not leave, but all of them were ready for battle. Their actions could even be described as swaggering, sitting in a Hummer in the parking lot outside the Dongfeng Group office, and the heavy machine guns that were specially allowed to be set up were also ready. Chen Chen's idea was very simple. If anything happened to Bao Qi's plane, their current team would go out in full force to wipe out all the JD elements in Jakarta, and even the whole of Indonesia, as well as the remnants of the CIA. Anyway, if they really dare to attack the wounded, it will be a matter of life and death. But fortunately, the plane flew smoothly. At around 5 p.m. on February 1st, Bao Qi and the medical team arrived in HK. They checked into the hospital ward at 6 p.m. and completed all the procedures using the identity that Xiaoyu had prepared. Next, he will undergo a series of recovery and adaptive treatments, trying to adapt to life without his right hand as quickly as possible. At that time, mobile terminals did not have video call functions, but using a very primitive camera plus microphone combination, the two parties were able to meet and confirm the situation. In the video, Bao Qi's mood is still quite high. Unlike Jakarta, in his heart, Hong Kong is really the north. For him, this is also a kind of wish come true to some extent. Chen Chen gave him a few instructions, and after confirming that everything was ready, he began to arrange the plan for the Dongfeng Corps. As the second-in-command, Shi Dakai must find a way to stabilize the Dongfeng Corps in Indonesia. So he will not follow Chen Chen back to Pubay, but will stay in Jakarta with the first batch of new members and prepare to welcome the second batch of reinforcements. Taking into account the possible shortage of manpower and the relatively high probability of low-intensity, high-frequency conflicts in Jakarta, Ping Chuan was also arranged to stay in Jakarta. As for Li Bang, Lin He, Yang Shu, and Ai Jiao, they will follow Chen Chen Fei back to Pubay to complete the complete integration of the two bases. After the tasks were assigned, Bao Xiaomei flew to Jakarta personally and arranged return tickets for Chen Chen and others. As soon as she saw Chen Chen, the undisguised admiration on Bao Xiaomei's face almost overflowed. "Mr. Chen, long time no see," Bao Xiaomei said softly. Looking at her eyes, Chen Chen got goosebumps for no reason. After being silent for several seconds, he finally answered, "It's been a long time indeed, a month. You have done a lot of great things in this month." Bao Xiaomei sighed and said faintly, "I feel like the gap between us is getting wider and wider. I originally thought that after winning the railway project, we would become equally matched friends. But now it seems that there is indeed a kind of people in this world that you can never catch up with no matter how hard you try. I tried everything, but I just opened up a path. It wasn't even me who opened it. I just borrowed the force. But you, in 1 month, you conquered a whole sea. But don't exaggerate like that." Chen Chen reluctantly interrupted Bao Xiaomei, and then asked, "How is the matter of the pagan railway going?" "There is no clear plan yet. After all, the time is too short. But the direction has been completely determined. We haven't done nothing in this month. The coalition forces have already cleared out a large number of loose warlords, including the Mofa militia that was previously sandwiched between Munka and Mengyang, which has also been defeated. Although it is not the case that the whole country is united, the situation is much more stable than before, and the basic conditions for the advancement of the Bagan Railway are now fully in place. It is only a matter of time before the project is advanced. We have already sent people to Yunnan to prepare for the project." Bao Xiaomei didn't finish her words, but Chen Chen nodded in understanding. For a huge project like this, it is impossible to expect it to be completely rational. At this stage, it's time to build customer relationships. If the logistical support is in place, you can avoid having your home stolen by others even when you have complete superior hard power. However, this kind of thing should certainly not be said in public. So Chen Chen just nodded slightly and said, "I see. I still have to rely on you to follow up. If we can sit this matter down, it will really benefit the present and future generations." "Is it difficult?" Hearing this, a hint of barely perceptible anger flashed across Bao Xiaomei's eyes. After a moment of silence, she finally replied, "Have. The resistance is mainly in Kachin. Someone is expanding in Pubay, and Kachin has gained new support. We have had 1 or 2 conflicts with them in Dangyang, but in the end there was no major fight. But I think that day won't be too far away." "That's good." After hearing these words, Chen Chen's reaction was not nervousness, but relief. This time when he returned, he had originally planned to take action against the CIA and the Kachin. "Now, I don't need to find excuses myself. People will come to me. Advertisement obstructing the construction of the Bagan Railway? No, that reason is certainly not enough. Destroying the unity of the people of Bagan? The height is high enough, but the influence is insufficient. In the final analysis, it is just the trivial things happening inside Bagan. But what if it is resisting the major historical trend and fashion of XX? Kachin? Several lives are not enough for you to die." It just so happened that he had just submitted his pledge of allegiance in Indonesia, and he still carried the residual prestige of being upright and above board. If he took action at this time, Xiaoyu would only support him. No one would dislike cutting the Gordian knot. Thinking of this, Chen Chen continued, "No need to waste time. Take off as soon as possible and return to Dakali as soon as possible. I want to see how far these wild dogs in Kachin can jump now." "No problem." Bao Xiaomei nodded immediately and didn't say any more romantic words to Chen Chen. She has also figured out Chen Chen's personality and is even trying to develop in the direction that Chen Chen likes. But unfortunately, sometimes, even if the direction is right, the effort may be meaningless. The Dongfeng Corps left Indonesia smoothly, without encountering any unexpected situations. They landed in Bangkok according to the same itinerary as before, then transferred to Chiang Mai from Bangkok, and finally took a bus from Chiang Mai to Tachalike. The old place was right in front of them, and everyone who was traveling with them was a little excited. As the saying goes, if one does not return to his hometown when he is rich and powerful, it is like wearing fine clothes and walking at night. For the few people except Chen Chen, they were truly rich and returned home. This was not about how much money they made outside, but how big a deal they had done. They beheaded the core members of GIS, dealt a heavy blow to the power of EIM in Indonesia, strangled several JDST activities that could have caused heavy casualties, killed the real elite of MPRI, seized a large number of super first-line equipment that they dared not even take, escaped from the local regular army, and even had a fight with Gurkha mercenaries, flexing their muscles in front of the aircraft carrier formation. In terms of intensity and firepower, this series of battles may not be as good as the chaotic fights between the mud-legged people when they were in Pubay, but listen to the introduction of these battles and see who participated in them. If the fights they had fought in Pubay before could be considered large-scale village-level battles, then the various tasks they were involved in this time were truly in line with international standards. Just the 2 points of fighter jet and aircraft carrier were enough for them to brag about to their acquaintances and old comrades countless times. So everyone was very excited along the way. Even Li Bang was excited and kept talking about all sorts of things. Chen Chen did not stop them. During non-mission periods, bragging is also a way to relieve stress. There is no need to be too harsh. The atmosphere was very cheerful, and the car was driving very fast. After more than 2 hours, the car had arrived in the north of Chiang Rai and near Tachalike. Chen Chen had already seen the Rock River not far away, and also saw the familiar Dakali Golden Buddha. In half an hour at most, they will be able to cross the border, enter the Pubay side of Dakali, and return to their old nest. It was basically impossible for anyone to stop them at this time. After all, the staff at the Golden Triangle port near Dakali had already been their own people. The CIA is unhappy with the coalition forces, Thailand is unhappy with the coalition forces, and the Americans are even more unhappy with the coalition forces. But the problem is that they are all far away, and you who work at a port have to come here every day. Should you go with the coalition forces or with the coalition forces' enemies? The result is actually self-evident. Chen Chen was very relieved about this, but often at times like this, the enemy can always give you an unexpected surprise. Just as they were about to drive off the highway, more than a dozen police cars with flashing lights came from behind and forced the Dongfeng Corps convoy to stop on the side of the road. Not only Chen Chen, everyone was stunned. Bao Xiaomei looked at the police officers who showed their identities in the front of the car in disbelief, and gave a look to one of her subordinates. After getting out of the car, the latter asked a few simple questions and then immediately had a fierce argument with the other party. But fortunately, no one made any radical moves, and the police officers did not draw their guns. After an argument, the police officer called his chief officer, and Bao Xiaomei's men returned to the car and reported the situation to Bao Xiaomei. They said they received a report that they suspected we were linked to a group of counterfeit cigarette dealers, and that it was linked to a previous case of illegal cigarette manufacturing that they were investigating. Yes, they're from the Tobacco Bureau. Tobacco Bureau? Bao Xiaomei was stunned, while Chen Chen suddenly realized. Still, the flaw was caught. Damn it, Bao Xiaomei has put a lot of thought into these people and the business of the Dongfeng Corps, paving the way for all the relationships and opening up all the avenues. But the question is, who in their right mind could have imagined that the enemy would actually start from the Tobacco Bureau? Being pullover isn't a big deal in Thailand, and it's certainly not like being in danger of having your magazine emptied like you would in free America. However, this incident happened now, and objectively speaking, it is extremely delicate, because this means that one's identity has been completely exposed, the thread being used has been pulled out, and the other party is obviously very familiar with the network of relationships that one has laid out, and knows exactly how to bypass one's network and complete the attack. Now, the Tobacco Bureau's request is very simple, which is to let everyone get off the bus to be inspected and go to their station to be investigated and questioned. The first request is easy to agree to. After all, it is impossible for them to find any evidence. But the latter? If you go to their place, can you still come out? Maybe these Tobacco Bureau staff themselves don't know what they are doing. I will go to negotiate. Bao Xiaomei spoke up. Chen Chen shook his head and replied, negotiation is useless. The storm is coming, someone is already targeting us. If negotiations could solve the problem, this incident today would not have happened at all. How far are we from Dakali now? Less than 2 kilometers. Bao Xiaomei replied, I mean as the crow flies. Only 0.300 meters? Hearing this, Chen Chen nodded slightly, and then replied, we can't leave. We have to find a car to pick us up. It's not far away. I can see it now. Notify He Bongxiong and have him drive the car to the Rock River. I see. What car do you want? Bao Xiaomei asked subconsciously. Chen Chen sneered and replied, what car? Of course, it's the 4 large agricultural transport vehicles with 5 pairs of road wheels that I just bought. The confrontation with the Tobacco Administration Bureau was the most bizarre, yet most tense confrontation Chen Chen had ever experienced. Judging from the roles of the 2 opposing parties, one side is a mercenary who has killed people like crazy. He just came down from the battlefield in Indonesia, and there is still a hint of gunpowder and blood on his body. Even though he has no equipment at all, just by standing there, his eyes reveal the signal that he wants to eat people. On the other hand, they were the Tobacco Administration Bureau, who were used to sitting in the office and only went out on field missions occasionally, basically checking some unlicensed small cigarette dealers. They were extremely timid. After all, they thought they had finally caught an easy target in this mission and would have to rush for a wave of performance in the second month of the new year, but they found that the tension of the situation was completely different from what they expected. One side was full of vigor, and the other was as timid as a mouse. But these 2 sides actually came to a stalemate at the highway exit on the edge of Dakali. From a distance of several hundred meters, Chen Chen could see the riverbank of Lock Wharf in the distance, where 2 VT 1A and two 63A tanks had adjusted their guns and aimed at the position where the two sides were confronting each other. At the same time, the two SH-3s have been set up and are ready to go. The deterrent is definitely strong enough, but such deterrents can actually only be targeted at ordinary employees of the Tobacco Bureau. They are cannon fodder, they are afraid of death, but what about the people behind them? To be honest, those people are afraid that they will not die. As long as they die, there will be a chance to create new conflicts between the Dongfeng Corps and Thailand, tear open a new breakthrough, and completely knock out the Dongfeng group, which is inserted in Pubay and has begun to develop outward. And this is the deterrence of the Tobacco Administration to the people of the Dongfeng Corps. From this perspective, the organizational characteristics of both sides are truly reflected vividly. One side is good at literature, and the other side is good at martial arts. This is not a script of a scholar meeting a soldier, but a case of a top scholar meeting bandits. The bandit could kill Wen Zhuang Yuan with one knife, but if Wen Zhuang Yuan died, the huge monster behind him would not let the bandit live. The atmosphere became increasingly tense, and Xiaoyu's men were still communicating, but there was one good thing. At least the Tobacco Administration Bureau no longer dared to take people away by force. Looking at her subordinates waving their arms angrily, an angry but helpless expression vaguely appeared on Bao Xiaomei's face. She turned to Chen Chen and said, I originally thought that our Hua state was strong enough, at least in this small area, we could have a say. But now it seems that people let us speak only because they need us. If there's a greater good at stake, we are no different from wild dogs. Hearing her words, Chen Chen shook his head and said jokingly, that may not be the case. At least now, you have a tendency to transform into a domestic dog, so they dare not act rashly. Otherwise, it would not be the Tobacco Administration Bureau that intercepted us, but the Pamong Battalion. If we are bombarded with a round of gunfire and accused of something, no matter how angry the big brother in the north is, he will not send troops to the south. This is a lesson. I can't go to Thailand anymore. I have to open up a direct route to the north, starting from Yunnan. I still rely on you to help me with my identity. Bao Xiaomei coughed and replied, why don't you look for your friend? She's inconvenient. Chen Chen answered without hesitation. Bao Xiaomei couldn't help but feel a little jealous when hearing these words. But in such a powerful enemy situation, she couldn't be confused, so she just nodded and replied, understood. I'll try to deal with it, but it will definitely require some connections. That's a story for later. What should I do now? Just go straight ahead. Chen Chen answered without hesitation. He knew very well that in the current situation, the weaker he was, the more likely it was that things would get out of control. This is essentially a psychological game. Only by making the other party believe that you really dare to kill people will they let you go at the risk of being held accountable. So Chen Chen immediately gave the order. Everyone get out of the car and clear the roadblock. Clear. At the command, several people from the Dongfeng Corps immediately took action. Without Chen Chen saying anything, Li Bang stepped forward and pushed away the Tobacco Administration Bureau police officer standing at the front of the car and kicked the spring roadblock on the ground to the side. His action instantly aroused resistance from the other side. There are always a few young and inexperienced people in a team, and it is at this time that the mature old men all hope that the young and inexperienced people can come out to take the blame. So, the two young men, who had no guns but only batons, rushed towards Li Bang shouting. Li Bang subconsciously reached for his waist, but found nothing there. But fortunately, he could do more than just shoot. The long-term basic training made him extremely mature in basic combat skills. Without any fancy moves, he took advantage of the opportunity when the opponent stretched out his hand to grab his collar and used an extremely simple wrist twist and knee lift, instantly shattering the opponent's jawbone. Then he did not lower his raised knee, but used the momentum to twist his body and kick sideways, hitting the chest of another person who had just arrived. The latter flew backwards nearly 2 meters and blood gushed out of his mouth. Chen Chen had seen too many people being kicked to spit blood. Not to mention kicking people to spit blood, he had also seen many people being kicked to death. The moment the other party flew out, he felt not surprised but nervous. If he really died, it would be difficult to deal with. Fortunately, Li Bang did not use much force in his kick, and the opponent vomited blood only because he bit his lips, not because of any horrible reasons like broken ribs or ruptured trachea. But even so, the atmosphere was already extremely tense. Everyone in the Tobacco Administration Bureau subconsciously raised their guns. Yang Shu, Lin He, and the short-legged man formed a triangle to guard Chen Chen, while Li Bang completely ignored the two people who fell to the ground, took a step forward, and said in a stiff and cold voice, if you block the road again, I will kill you. If you dare to shoot, we will dare to fire. As the most reckless man in the Dongfeng Corps, Li Bang's two threats were indeed very lethal. After confirming that he was definitely not bluffing, everyone in the Tobacco Administration Bureau immediately considered retreating. Chen Chen keenly noticed their changes and immediately gave Bao Xiaomei a look. Bao Xiaomei understood what was meant and took the blame, directing her men to remove the roadblocks. The group got into the car again, and the lead car directly knocked away the roadblock car that didn't have time to retreat and drove away. The crisis seemed to have been resolved, but Chen Chen knew that this was far from the end. Go! The other side didn't set an ambush here. They just happened to catch up with us here. They were clearly ill-prepared, and someone who wants to target us wouldn't make that mistake. That means their purpose is not to catch us, but just to delay time. How long will it take to get through the port? If it doesn't work, we can abandon the car and have He Bongxiong drive the assault boat over and go directly across the river. Straight from the river. Bao Xiaomei answered decisively. At this moment, she also realized that the situation was getting out of control. Yes, this is just a small episode. Advertisement, but the problem is, in her careful plan, not to mention a small episode, even a deviation in time point should not have occurred. There is a saying that goes, when you find a cockroach in your home, it means that there are already countless cockroaches breeding and growing in corners that you can't see. The Dongfeng Corps has made such a big fuss, their strategic value is no longer comparable to that of the Dongfeng Corps when it just left Pubay. In this case, the enemy will inevitably increase its investment, and the strategy formulated according to the situation at that time will definitely be at risk. Of course, this is not inevitable. She could just take a gamble and bet that nothing would happen next. However, in her interactions with Chen Chen and the Dongfeng Corps, she has learned one thing. Mistakes are not terrible, and in fact, they are completely acceptable. What is unacceptable is covering up mistakes. So, she exposed her mistake without hesitation and explained the risks to Chen Chen. As she expected, Chen Chen did not blame her at all, but quickly made new arrangements. At this time, they had passed through most of the city of Dakali and reached the banks of the Luaka River. Across the street was Lock Wharf, and Chen Chen could even see Bongxiong standing next to the tank. The assault boat has started and is heading towards the opposite shore. At the speed of this ship, everyone can board and evacuate in at most 1 minute. But at this moment, several border patrol boats came from the upstream west side of the rock river. Chen Chen saw at a glance that those sitting on the boat were definitely not ordinary water police, but fully armed special forces. Their attire is so typical that they can be recognized at a glance. The Thai Underwater Demolition Attack Force, known as the Thai SEALs, the source of troops in Chaisri, the mother's home of the Jackal. Their appearance here is not due to some kind of accident. All of this was planned. Chen Chen was only curious about what reason these people were going to use to arrest him, or did they really want to launch a large-scale crackdown at the national level? Impossible. If that were the case, the other party should have already taken action quietly and would not have given us a chance to react. This is most likely a continuation of certain events that happened to be exploited by the CIA for some reason. Pam on camp, military government. The veins on Chen Chen's forehead were throbbing, and he felt as if he was in conflict with the military government. No matter where you go, your biggest enemy is the military government. Thinking of this, he took a deep breath and said, "We can't conflict with them. They're here to arrest people. Whoever strikes first will suffer. Notify the assault boat to ram them. Send another ship to pick us up. Clear." The message was sent out immediately, and He Bongxiong's actions were actually faster than Chen Chen's orders. The moment those speedboats appeared, He Bongxiong had already commanded his fleet to move. Due to the continuous development of foreign trade business, the number of allied ships gathered at Lock Wharf continued to increase, and the scale of the wharf also expanded a lot. Within just a dozen seconds, all the light boats roared out of the waves and headed towards the patrol boat upstream. One of them drove a 3-engine speedboat often called Defei, which overtook the assault boat at an astonishing speed. After hitting the patrol boat, it used the hull as a springboard to fly up, jumped out more than 10 meters, and then crashed into the water again. The patrol boat instantly capsized, and the Thai Navy SEALs fell into the water. They stared in amazement at the driver, who had also fallen into the water. The driver had already raised his hands while stepping on the water and shouted loudly in Thai, "Traffic accident! Traffic accident!" This is definitely an extremely perfunctory but irrefutable reason. This thing is irrefutable even if you take it to some part of the sea, let alone the Rock River. In fact, the Thai SEALs did not fire any shots, but just shouted at the crew to lay down their weapons. This scene made Chen Chen a little confused. Are they so restrained? The restraint of the Tobacco Administration is understandable, but when did the Thai SEALs start to practice civilized law enforcement? In fact, this force is quite active in the Mekong River area. It has rich experience in actual combat, arrests, and even intelligence gathering. Many of the jobs they do are dirty, and they should not be so lenient. Could it be that the order they received was simply to arrest someone, and if the other party resisted with a gun, then just punishment would be carried out? This could explain their slowness, but it also made the situation more complicated. There's a big problem. Chen Chen didn't have time to care about so many things. At this time, the speedboat arranged by He Bongxiong had reached the river. He was the first to get on the boat, and then everyone set off one after another. While crossing the river, he looked at the patrol boat that was entangled with a civilian boat in the distance. The Thai Navy SEAL members on it had confusion written all over their faces. The way they looked at Chen Chen was even a little innocent, especially when they saw the tanks on the shore and thought about the relationship between the people they wanted to capture and the tanks. They became even more confused. Chen Chen subconsciously shook his head at them, indicating that he didn't understand the situation either. The two sides had no contact from beginning to end, but after this long-distance dialogue, a question arose in the minds of both sides at the same time. Who is it? At this time, the ship had already docked. Chen Chen had just got off the ship when He Bongxiong and his personal soldiers surrounded him. Then, they retreated quickly under the cover of armored vehicles. They did not say anything until they left Lock Wharf and retreated to a safe area. "Brother Chen, welcome back. I've had enough of these damn catching spies. Luckily, you didn't get into trouble this time. If you had, I would have turned the entire Pubei upside down. Let's go back to the headquarters first, and then, etc." Chen Chen interrupted He Bongxiong and asked, "Catch and spy. Did they do this?" He Bongxiong nodded solemnly and replied, "It must be. The method is exactly the same. We have been tricked twice before, and this is the third time. It's not a big deal every time, but it's very disgusting. I think there's more to this than meets the eye. We need to be more vigilant." Hearing what He Bongxiong said, Chen Chen frowned. Mobilizing and utilizing multiple forces may also hide key information. This technique, why is it so familiar? Sunken, I missed you so much. Dakali, inside the headquarters of the Dongfeng Corps. Chen Chen never expected that the first person to greet him was not Peng Shuqing, not Suyu, not Xiaoyu, but Jackal. This guy was supposed to be in Munka, but because he got the news in advance that Chen Chen was about to return, he actually arrived in Dakali 3 days in advance to wait. His sincerity has reached the point where there is no need to verify it. "You have no idea how I've been doing while you've been away. I can finally understand how much better our situation has been when you've been here. In more than a month, I haven't found any battle examples worth seeing here. The coalition forces did fight a few battles, but they were all unremarkable. Either the equipment is overwhelming or the firepower is overwhelming. There is absolutely no tactical beauty at all. To be honest, I can only study all the battle examples you summarized before again. I found a lot of new things. Absence makes one miss more, doesn't it?" That's not how the pun is used. Chen Chen interrupted the Jackal helplessly. What he just said was a short sentence similar to a proverb in English. absence makes the heart grow fonder. In theory, it can indeed be used to describe the situation of the jackal who cannot get what he wants, but in the way he expressed it, it was somewhat ambiguous. Hearing Chen Chen's words, the jackal was stunned for a moment, and then explained, I just want to express that I need something new. I heard about your battle in Indonesia. It was great. I should say, it was simply amazing. But I can't get any specific information. I can only get some general information through the internet. But even so, I can't wait. Tell me quickly, how did you scare away the American aircraft carrier formation? How did you lock onto their position? When did we scare away the U.S. aircraft carrier formation? Chen Chen was stunned. In fact, not only did they not scare away the aircraft carrier formation, they didn't even see a single hair of the aircraft carrier. It was only from the intelligence summary after the battle that they learned that the 2 superlinks were received by the aircraft carrier formation that was hovering on the sea at the time. As for why they left, isn't it because they have done what they were supposed to do? The JD elements of ISK have been wiped out, and their deal with ISK in Syria has ended. There is no point in staying any longer. In this case, what are we waiting for? As for the claim that they were scared away by the Dongfeng Corps, isn't that pure nonsense? Seeing Chen Chen's surprised expression, Jackal was stunned for a moment and replied, this is all summarized by some EWF on the internet based on public intelligence. Isn't that the case? Of course not. Do you really think Americans are stupid? Wait, what is EWF? It's Eastwind fans, Dongfeng fans, your fans. Wow. It's only been a short time and Dongfeng Corps already has fans? Doesn't this mean that Dongfeng Corps was a bit too high profile in the early stage? But this doesn't seem to be a question of whether it is high profile or not. Basically, all the things that the Dongfeng Corps has been involved in are the core hot events in recent times. In this case, it is not easy for someone to dig a little deeper to find out the truth of the matter, but if one just wants to identify the parties involved, it is not difficult. Coupled with the exaggerated stories about the Dongfeng Corps before, it is not surprising that there are fans. Thinking of this, Chen Chen couldn't help but sigh. Then he said, everything on the internet is fake. You will understand it later. It's not that exaggerated. We just assisted the local police as a third-party armed force in completing an anti-terrorism operation at sea. Then why did you beat the Gurkhas? The jackal asked suddenly. But it's all a misunderstanding. Kurno's fight with MPRI was also a misunderstanding? Chen Chen frowned and asked, shouldn't there be this information on the internet? This is my own source of information. There is no public channel, but there are many people among IMT members. An overwhelming victory across generations is the evaluation of some people. However, some people believe that this was an accidental failure caused by MPRI's poor command and wrong strategic choice. To be honest, I really want to know what the truth is. We'll talk about this later. Chen Chen waved his hand, took Jackal into his own office, and then said, I asked you to investigate Jia's information before, but you seem to have forgotten about it. But now, I see some of her in the actions of Kachin and the CIA. I want to know whether the series of things that Bongxiong encountered recently were her doing. That's something I'm considering as well. Before Chen Chen could finish, Jackal interrupted and said, I've heard about what happened to you today. Including this time, Dongfeng Group and the coalition forces have encountered 3 similar incidents recently. The first time, Bongxiong's hotel was suspected of having forced sex transactions. When transporting a group of workers, there was a conflict with the Thai side. There was a big uproar in public opinion, and the customer flow was reduced by half, resulting in a sharp drop in the income of this business. The second time was when your gold mine in Hawaii was jointly enforced by Laos and Thailand. The reason was the environmental pollution caused by mineral processing. Can you imagine? What kind of environmental pollution can a gold mine cause? The third time is what happened to you today. These 3 incidents have one thing in common. That is, the departments involved in the execution are quite marginal, such as the Thai Labor Bureau in the first case, the Mining Administration Bureau of both parties in the second case, and the Tobacco Administration Bureau in the third case. It seems that these departments have no idea who they're trying to catch, or the intelligence they have is flawed. But at the same time, their attitude is quite tough. If you had not had response methods and backup forces that exceeded their expectations in the 3 incidents, you would have been defeated long ago. From a perceptual point of view, this situation is indeed very dangerous because the opponent fails every time at the start stage. What if they succeed in starting next time? To be honest, I once suspected that this matter had something to do with Jia, because she is good at using very small events as leverage to drive other big things to happen. But the evidence now shows that it was not her who did it. Hearing Jackal's words, Chen Chen nodded thoughtfully, and then asked, why do you say it wasn't her? Because I already know where she is. As soon as Jackal finished speaking, Chen Chen's eyes widened. Did you find it? Before the Jackal could answer, he continued, so the last report is indeed related to her, right? Yes, that's her handwriting. Tell me the details. Chen Chen took a deep breath and spoke. In fact, it is obviously impossible to say how much he cares about Jia's condition. After all, to him, Jia was just a passerby. It could even be said that the series of events triggered by Jia was just a springboard for the Dongfeng Corps. The value of this springboard ended when he decided to label Jia as a CIA agent and hand her over to the Thai side. Advertisement, what really made him interested in this person again, or gave him a sense of crisis, was the last report. For Chen Chen, the fact that someone who knew the Dongfeng Corps so well was speaking out uncontrollably was a risk that he could not easily take. If we find her, even if we can't kill her directly, we will at least need to use some means to control her. This is Chen Chen's real purpose. And the Jackal obviously understood Chen Chen's intention, and all his subsequent answers revolved around the key information that Chen Chen wanted to know. Jia is alive because of the King of Thailand. She relied on the so-called CIA identity to gain a brief chance to survive. Using this opportunity, I don't know what method she used, she eventually got in touch with Bansiri and finally got in touch with the military. Someone in the military, I don't know who it is, seemed to want to use her to ease the previous conflict with the King of Thailand. So he sent her to the King of Thailand. After meeting the King of Thailand again, she changed sides on the spot, overturned her CIA identity, and gained the trust of the King of Thailand. She provided the Thai king with a lot of key evidence, which dealt a major blow to the military. If you pay attention to the political situation in Thailand, you will find that such a Passak has been removed from office. This is the most typical manifestation of internal turmoil. You can imagine the huge waves behind the removal of the military chief. Of course, this was not her fault, but she certainly rode the right wave. After that, she was given considerable freedom, but she was still basically working for the king. As far as I know, she is still in a room in the Thai king's palace, providing him with special references. Under the circumstances, I find it hard to believe she would be distracted to consider such little things. After all, the things she can intervene in now are much bigger than targeting the Dongfeng group. After listening to Jackal's story, Chen Chen literally took a deep breath. He never expected that Jia not only survived, but also lived so well. It is true that people who are favored by the king of Thailand generally do not have a good ending. When they are valuable in the early stages, they are exploited in various ways. Once their value disappears, they are discarded like old shoes, and you may even end up in jail. But no matter what, at least now she has really influenced the top leaders of a country to a certain extent. It's magical and very ironic. Just because of a time difference problem, the person who originally wanted to kill her saved her. In any case, if the Jackal's information is accurate, Jia does not seem like she would interfere in such a matter. Thinking of this, Chen Chen frowned slightly, and then asked, "Is your information accurate?" 60% accuracy. The key information will not be wrong, but I cannot guarantee the accuracy of the details of how she achieved this series of results. There may be some artistic processing involved, or there may be distortion during the transmission process. But I think this shouldn't affect the most basic judgment. No, it will have an impact. Chen Chen shook his head to deny Jackal's opinion, and then said, "This is a question of stance. We can infer her stance from the means she uses to achieve her goal. If the position changes, it is possible that she will join forces with Thailand to deal with us. The only question is motivation. The Thai side has no reason to do these things. Their impetus must come from outside. For now, I can only consider this outside world to be the CIA." That's what I thought. The Jackal nodded immediately and continued, "Since this year, the CIA's activities in Thailand have obviously become more frequent. There are many signs to refer to. There is no need for signs. This should be related to you." "No." Chen Chen quickly shook his head. He was not being modest when he said this, but was objectively stating a fact. The Jackal's perception is actually quite sharp. Since 2010, the CIA's area of activity in Asia has shifted from the previous East Asia to Southeast Asia and South Asia. This is not because their strategic points of contention have changed, but because a certain country in East Asia has really become uninhabitable. According to some intelligence Chen Chen had read in his previous life, 2010 was the first year that the CIA's activities in the north suffered a severe blow and began to shift from expansion to contraction. At this point in time, deep intelligence from within the northern government plummeted, a large number of informants and channels were cleared out, and the employees themselves began to be restricted. After entering 2011, high-level intelligence was almost cut off, and the FBI intervened in the internal investigation, but found no signs of system or organization intrusion. But the problem is that they really had no other way to go, so they had to settle for the next best thing and start entering Southeast Asia. A large number of personnel needed to be absorbed, and a large number of jobs could not be eliminated. So during this stage, the CIA carried out many unexpected operations. For example, establishing a money laundering center in Southeast Asia, cultivating new forces, and exploring a new border criminal economy. Telecom fraud actually broke out completely in 2015 after the CIA withdrew its staff from the Beijing embassy. In this life, the situation is actually similar. Even the existence of the Dongfeng Corps accelerated this process. It is no surprise, then, that the CIA has stepped up its activities in Southeast Asia. They do their thing, and we do our thing. Chen Chen made a decision in an instant, and then he said to the Jackal, "You continue to find ways to help me investigate and determine the context of the matter. Tell me as soon as you have any news. I won't handle this matter myself. I have to do something else." "Understood. What are you going to do? Can you take me with you?" The Jackal's eyes were full of expectation. Chen Chen shook his head and replied, "You really can't get involved this time. Your identity is still too sensitive after all. Don't get yourself involved just for the sake of watching the fun." "What exactly is it? I can take a look," and then, the Jackal asked subconsciously, but soon realized the inappropriateness of his question. He quickly shut up, but Chen Chen didn't care too much. He replied, "I want to fight Cunning and completely eliminate the CIA's hidden agents in Pubay. It's going to be a big fight for sure. I am ready to use multiple arms to coordinate operations. Real multiple arms coordination." Chen Chen had actually been preparing for a long time regarding the attack plan on Cunning and Wenbang. This is not a revenge done on a whim, nor is it simply doing something for the benefit of others, but a strategic decision made after careful consideration. If the Dongfeng Corps wants to gain a foothold in Pubay, it must have a relatively stable external environment. This stable external environment certainly does not mean complete unification of Pubay, but a rich competitive environment that maintains consistency in the general direction. In a word, there can be warlords, separatist regimes, fighting for life and death, and even occupying land and becoming king. However, no force can attempt to block the general trend of development or oppose the macro strategy. It is obvious that among the many warlords and ethnic local armed forces here, only the Kachin has the conditions and motivation to go against the general trend. So, Chen Chen had to get rid of it. Even if we don't wipe them out directly like we did with Zhao Jiaoyang, we still have to remove the internal thorns and eliminate most of the pro-American forces within Kachin. The specific action strategy is actually very simple and is divided into 3 parts in total. The first part is to carry out high-intensity and high-frequency decapitation operations to eliminate most of the pro-American senior officials and high-influence figures. The second part is to wipe out the Kachin strongholds and bases scattered throughout Pubay and cut off their economic sources. This part will inevitably involve Wenbang and the CIA, and is also the part that directly hits them the most. The third part is to organize a major battle to defeat their main force and eliminate their ability to resist. All three parts require certain preliminary preparations. The Dongfeng Corps was actually able to do the first part, but as I said before, an unsystematic attack cannot form an effective and thorough blow. So Chen Chen did not take any action until the conditions of the last two parts were ripe before making the decision to go to war. Obviously, in the current environment, the conditions are ripe. After the trip to Indonesia, the Dongfeng Corps received a considerable degree of support, which made it much easier to obtain equipment and political resources in the future. At the same time, because of several major battles in the early stages, Kokong, Hua State, and North and South Shan states have basically formed a stable alliance of interests. The northward route from Dakali to Bamo is unobstructed. The Dongfeng Corps has gained a broad strategic depth and a relatively safe supply line. Finally, the preparation of equipment and manpower has become perfect. The Dongfeng Corps no longer has to rely on a dozen or 20 people to conquer the world as before. The Dongfeng Corps now has thousands of outsourced forces wearing bulletproof vests, and its core forces also include tanks, heavy artillery, rockets, and helicopters. With such firepower, can't they defeat Ga Yaozi? Unless the Burmese army takes action themselves. Unfortunately, after suffering a series of setbacks, the Burmese army has learned their lesson. They know that even if some things are not good for them in the long run, as long as they can get by in the short term, they will just have to muddle through. Therefore, all the mobilization fragments for the Ga Yaozi strategy have been gathered, and action against them can be said to be imperative. Chen Chen revealed the news to Jackal without any hesitation. This was his final test. If Jackal can stand firm in this action, then he will truly become an ally of the Dongfeng Corps and Chen Chen. No matter what, Chen Chen still has great confidence in him. After sending the Jackal away, Chen Chen immediately convened a meeting with the core members of Dongfeng Group and the coalition forces to understand the current situation and inform them of the plan for the next stage. He told everyone that in the next 3 months, everyone's main goal was only one: mobilize all resources and take over Ga Yaozi. He Bupa and he Bongxiong, who were both soldiers, were particularly excited about this. Besides them, there was also anticipation in the eyes of others. Great unification? No, it's too early to mention such a word now. But there's a trend, isn't there? After a meeting, everyone took action immediately. Peng Shuqing and Su Yu found Chen Chen separately and reported to him the current equipment preparation status of the Dongfeng Corps. Sitting in Chen Chen's own office, Peng Shuqing said, "We currently have a total of 8 armored vehicles, 6 of which have arrived, and 2 are expected to arrive next week. You have seen 2 VT-1A tanks and 2 63A tanks. They are all foreign trade models from Tanzania. They are very clean in every aspect. The various weapons and ammunition that come with the tanks have also arrived. If they are not enough, we can continue to order more." At the same time, Tanzania offered us a digital upgrade plan, but to be honest, we didn't dare to accept it, so I didn't discuss it. Hearing Peng Shuqing's words, Chen Chen nodded slightly to show his appreciation. He knew what the digital upgrade plan Peng Shuqing was talking about was. In fact, it is a transitional expansion module for the old VT-1A tank, which is part of the VT-2 pre-project plan, or it can be said that it is a byproduct of a battlefield test, the purpose of which is to provide data for subsequent foreign trade model tanks. The features of this thing are very obvious, including fire control radar, new electro-optical sights, and even some high-end models are equipped with the commander's omnidirectional observation tower, which is fundamentally different from the rustic VT-1A. And precisely because of its obvious characteristics, Chen Chen was unable to use it. Because once this latest experimental model tank appears in Pubei, many things will become unclear. It has to be said that Peng Shuqing has a very keen political sense. Thinking of this, Chen Chen said, "No problem, we don't need this thing. What about reactive armor? How many sets are there? We currently have 8 sets of FY-4 reactive armor, with a penetration resistance equivalent to 180 millimeters, which should be enough for Pubei." That is indeed enough. The penetration resistance is equivalent to 180 millimeters, which is almost equivalent to that of a 125 millimeters caliber armor-piercing projectile. The penetration depth can be reduced by about 40% to 50%. Combined with the tank's own armor, the risk of being penetrated can basically be completely avoided. Unless they launch a top-down attack, no one can really do anything to these tanks. However, the Ga Yaozis do have helicopters. So Chen Chen continued to ask, "No need to introduce the tank in detail. I am familiar with its parameters. What are the other 4 armored vehicles?" 2 PLZ-45s and 2 SM-4s. The SM-4s came from Algeria and have not arrived yet. 155 howitzer plus 81M howitzer, full firepower and full military strength. So now, what the Dongfeng Corps lacks is no longer heavy firepower, but intermediate firepower like the previous F-150, as well as anti-aircraft firepower. After thinking for a moment, Chen Chen said, "Import 2 more WZ-05 dual 57mm self-propelled anti-aircraft guns to deal with the Ga Yaozi helicopters. Also, add a batch of wheeled light armored vehicles, either Marauders or Warriors. Is there enough money?" Hearing this, Peng Shuqing nodded first, then slowly shook his head. "Advertisement. We currently have $90 million in cash on our books, which is more than enough to purchase equipment. But after completing the equipment purchase, we will only have about $60 million left, which is below the safety line. Laozhou has already started a large-scale expansion, and the number of people training at the Munka base has reached 50. The cost of personnel and equipment loss, equipment depreciation, and material consumption can reach more than $1.5 million per month. Add in other operating costs. It is completely impossible to maintain a balance between income and expenditure by relying solely on sporadic mercenary missions. In addition, gold mining requires a lot of capital and is currently in a net outflow phase, consuming at least $2 million per month. According to preliminary estimates, with the current amount of funds, we can sustain it for 8 months. It's definitely enough for an ordinary commercial company, but ours is a special case. Once a fight breaks out, money will flow out like water. I don't know how much excess cost will be consumed just for the emergency equipment procurement. Whether the 60 million yuan can last for 2 months and until the proceeds from the catching campaign are realized is actually an unknown. In short, we need to expand into new markets to inject stable blood into us. Understood. Chen Chen nodded slightly, and after a moment's silence, he said, let's sell a batch of bulletproof vests to Indonesia first. We have reached a cooperation with the local police. The purchase is expected to be more than 10,000 sets, but the price needs to be lowered to less than 3,000 US dollars. Go talk to the manufacturers and try to lower the purchase price as much as possible to increase profits. I understand, but it's not enough. Peng Shuqing answered without hesitation. We need at least another 40 million US dollars to get our funds back on track. The bulletproof vest business looks very profitable, but we are just a middleman, and our scale is too small to be meaningful. Is there any other business you can do? There really isn't one at the moment, at least not in Pubei. Chen Chen shook his head slowly. Contrary to what many people think, arms trade is not something you can sell. Just because you have the goods, there is demand in the market, and you have connections. In fact, one of the most important issues is the contradiction between market saturation and break-even baseline. Chen Chen plans to conduct arms trade in Indonesia. But the problem is that the arms purchased by the Indonesian government are generally national level and have extremely high requirements for their level of advancement. For some small orders, the hidden costs you need to pay far exceed the profit of one order. You said that my first order is not profitable, so I will open up a market first. But what will happen after the market is opened up? Do you think you will have a steady stream of business? The depreciation and consumption rate of weapons and ammunition is limited. If it is not a war zone, where does the demand for so many weapons come from? For example, in Indonesia, the only ones who can digest a large amount of weapons and equipment are the JD elements and the armed groups in West Papua. Is Chen Chen going to sell arms to them? Once this order is completed, the future of the Dongfeng Corps will basically be over. To resolve this contradiction, it is not enough to rely on relationships and ways. What is most needed is steady and solid management to reduce costs to the greatest extent possible, expand product categories, and gradually penetrate the market. Pulling a batch of arms worth hundreds of millions from the armory and selling them for a settlement in seconds is something that only happens in fairy tales. More commonly, the customer tells you, I need 50,000 bullets, 500 sets of bulletproof vests, and 20 radios. Please help me put them together, ship them as soon as possible, and pay in installments. Generally speaking, arms deals require a relatively long preparation time. But the Dongfeng Corps does not have that much time now. Chen Chen couldn't help but frown. But after thinking for a moment, his eyes suddenly lit up. Then he said, you still need to open your mind. The police need not only bulletproof vests, but also a variety of anti-terrorism and anti-riot equipment. In January this year, the Indonesian police just passed a counterterrorism enhancement plan, which is expected to invest 240 million US dollars to strengthen the equipment of the counterterrorism police force. Body armor procurement is only part of it. In addition, they also need various reconnaissance equipment, various vehicles, and non-lethal weapons. There are plenty of these in the north. You go to Indonesia and negotiate this deal. Okay, but how? Peng Shuqing looked a little confused. He could understand what Chen Chen said, but the problem was that he had no idea what he was going to sell. Seeing his expression, Chen Chen smiled slightly and replied, Indonesia's anti-terrorism work has moved beyond the realm of elitist, and grassroots anti-terrorism forces are given more attention. So what these police forces need is not the most advanced equipment, but enough, sufficient, and cheap equipment. The idea is simple. Task Force 88 has Hummers, so local police departments can use armored pickup trucks. Task Force 88 has wall-penetrating detectors, so local police departments can use remote-controlled unmanned vehicles. Task Force 88 has head-mounted night vision goggles, so local police departments can use 5,000 lumen strobe flashlights. We will focus on consumption downgrade and equal replacement. Understood? Lao Su, let's work together on this matter. You are responsible for the supply, and I am responsible for the customers. No problem. So you answered immediately, and Chen Chen nodded with satisfaction. That's the good thing about being a boss. For many things, you don't need to think too much about them. Just give a simple direction, and your capable subordinates will naturally execute it. Thinking of this, he said, if we can follow this path, we can basically maintain a stable cash flow. What I need to consider mainly is the specific combat issues. Boss Peng, when you go to Indonesia this time, please do me one more thing. What's up? Peng Shuqing asked. Chen Chen coughed and replied, in Indonesia, we have already formed an air team. When I came back, the 3 seaplanes had passed the acceptance inspection. Originally, these 3 aircraft were intended to be used for combat support, and the modification direction is also in line with actual combat modifications. But now, for some reason, the high-intensity conflict in Indonesia ended ahead of schedule, and these 3 aircraft will be in a semi-idle state for a long time. I think we can put them to use. Find a way to transport it back to Pubei. By the way, bring the pilot back too.